The red dust of Mars had long settled upon the ruins of humanity's first great leap into the solar system. What was once the crown jewel of human extraterrestrial settlement had become a radioactive wasteland during the devastating nuclear conflicts of Old Night. Yet from these ashes, a new society would emerge, one that would reshape the destiny of humanity across the stars and eventually become the bedrock of the Imperium's technological might. In the dark millennia of the Age of Strife, as Terra descended into savage techno-barbarism, Mars followed a different path. The initial colonies, isolated by warp storms that severed interstellar travel and communication, faced extinction as Mars' biosphere collapsed. The surviving colonists retreated into sealed habitats beneath the planet's surface, desperately preserving what technology they could. These underground vaults became the first forge temples, where technology was not merely maintained but venerated. The transformation of Mars from a dying colony to the mightiest forge world in human history began with these scattered enclaves of survivors. As the radiation levels gradually subsided, the tech priests, as they would later be known, emerged from their subterranean sanctuaries to reclaim the surface. They built the first true forges around the ancient habitation domes, expanding outward across the rusty plains. The Olympus Mons region, with its natural geological protection and abundant mineral resources, became the center of this new civilization. The harsh environment of Mars shaped the philosophy of its inhabitants. Where Terran survivors turned to muscle, mutation, and mysticism, the Martians embraced augmentation and the certainty of machine logic. Their isolation fostered a unique culture centered on the preservation and recovery of technology. Ancient SDC databases became sacred texts, and the engineers who could interpret them were elevated to the status of priests. This nascent religious fervor coalesced into the cult Mechanicus, with its doctrine of the machine god, the Omnissiah. The belief system was elegant in its practicality. Technology was divine, knowledge was salvation, and flesh was weak. The human body, vulnerable to radiation, starvation, and the harsh Martian environment, became something to transcend rather than preserve. The first augmentations were necessary survival adaptations, but they quickly evolved into symbols of status and devotion. The quest for knowledge became the central tenet of the Mechanicum, driving its adherents to recover lost technology from the ruins of Martian civilization. This quest was not merely academic, it was existential. Each recovered fragment of an SDC or ancient machine code meant survival for the struggling colonies. The doctrine of the machine god provided structure and purpose to this desperate scavenging, transforming pragmatic necessity into religious obligation. As the forge temples grew in size and power, the priesthood developed a complex hierarchy based on technological expertise and the extent of augmentation. The binary cant, a language of machine code and data burst communication, emerged as both a practical tool for interfacing with machines and a sacred tongue that separated the initiated from the uninitiated. The Mechanicum society stratified into distinct orders: the Magi who led through their mastery of specific technological domains, the Lex Mechanics who preserved data, the Engine Seers who maintained the machines, and countless other specialized roles. By the 30th millennium, Mars had transformed into a world of vast forge complexes linked by sprawling transport networks. Towering manufactoria belched smoke into the thin atmosphere, while armies of servitors, mindless cyborg laborers created from criminals, failed apprentices, or vat-grown bodies, performed the manual labor beneath the watchful eyes of the tech priests. The surface between forges remained hostile, populated by scavenger tribes and rogue machines that had escaped their masters during the collapse. The political structure of Mars evolved into a theocratic oligarchy centered around the Fabricator General and the Martian Parliament. Each forged temple operated with considerable autonomy under its ruling magos, controlling its territories and specialized production. These forge lords competed fiercely for resources, archaeotech discoveries, and political influence, forming complex alliances and rivalries that shaped Martian politics. It was into this environment that Kelber Hal rose to prominence. Born in the Mondus Gamma Forge Temple, Kelber Hal distinguished himself through both technological brilliance and political acumen. Where many tech priests focused solely on their research, Kelber Hal understood the value of alliances and the accumulation of power. He specialized in the production of war machines and weapon systems, ensuring his forge's importance as Mars began to expand its influence to nearby worlds and asteroids. Kelber Hal's ascension to Fabricator General came after decades of careful maneuvering within the Martian Parliament. He cultivated support among the more conservative elements of the priesthood, who feared external influences on their sacred traditions. His predecessor's sudden death, officially attributed to a catastrophic augmetic failure, but whispered by some to be Kelber Hal's work, created the opportunity he had long prepared for. The Parliament elected him Fabricator General in recognition of his forge's productivity and his apparent devotion to Mechanicum traditions. As Fabricator General, Kelber Hal expanded the Mechanicum's power through aggressive colonization of nearby asteroids and moons, establishing new forge temples that answered directly to him rather than to the Parliament. He reorganized the Legio Cybernetica and other military branches of the Mechanicum, ostensibly to protect these new holdings, but also to strengthen his personal authority. The Martian priesthood and synod, theoretically checks on the Fabricator General's power, found themselves increasingly marginalized as Kelber Hal placed his supporters in key positions. Beneath the surface of Martian society, ideological divisions were deepening. The more conservative tech priests, including many in Kelber Hal's inner circle, adhered strictly to the doctrine that innovation was dangerous. They believed that humanity's fall from technological grace during the Age of Strife had been punishment for the sin of unsanctioned invention. Only by recovering and preserving the perfect technologies of the past could redemption be achieved. In opposition stood a minority faction of more progressive tech priests who argued that the Omnissiah blessed not just preservation, but also creation. These tech priests, often younger and from the more isolated forge temples, believed that the Mechanicum's survival depended on adaptation and controlled innovation. Kelber Hal exploited this division masterfully, publicly supporting the conservative doctrine while privately allowing limited innovation when it served his interests. The Mechanicum had established itself as the unchallenged technological power in the Sol system by the time the Emperor's Great Crusade began to reclaim the lost worlds of humanity. Mars possessed the largest fleet, the most advanced weapons, and manufacturing capabilities that dwarfed anything remaining on Terra. When the Emperor's forces secured Terra and began to look outward, Mars represented both the greatest potential ally and the most formidable potential obstacle to unification. The first diplomatic exchanges between Terra and Mars were cautious. The Emperor, understanding the Mechanicum's quasi-religious nature, did not attempt to impose imperial truth as he had on Terra. Instead, he offered something the tech priests could not refuse: access to lost technologies recovered from human colonies across the stars, protection for Mechanicum expeditions to recover more, and the resources of hundreds of worlds to fuel Mars forges. The Treaty of Mars, signed in approximately 800th year of the 30th millennium, formalized this alliance. The document recognized the Mechanicum's autonomy in internal affairs and religious practices, a significant concession from an emperor dedicated to secular rationalism elsewhere. In exchange, the Mechanicum would provide technical expertise, manufacturing capacity, and maintenance services for the expanding imperial war machine. Most significantly, the emperor allowed himself to be identified as the Omnissiah, the physical manifestation of the machine god, giving religious legitimacy to the alliance in the eyes of the tech priests. This identification of the emperor as the Omnissiah was not universally accepted within the Mechanicum. Some tech priests saw it as political expediency rather than theological truth, while others embraced it as the fulfillment of ancient prophecies. Kelber Hal publicly supported the identification, seeing the practical benefits of alliance with the Emperor's growing imperium, but privately harbored reservations about Terra's influence over Martian affairs. The integration of the Mechanicum into the Imperium transformed both institutions. The Mechanicum gained access to resources beyond anything available in the Sol system alone, allowing an unprecedented expansion of its forges and research facilities. The Imperium gained the technological foundation necessary for its rapid expansion across the galaxy. Mechanicum representatives, tech priests, engine seers, and lex mechanics accompanied every expedition of the Great Crusade, assessing recovered technology and establishing new forge worlds on suitable planets. This partnership produced the mighty war machines that would conquer the stars, the titans of the Collegia Titanica, the knights of the Questor Mechanicus, the battle automata of the Legio Cybernetica, and the countless weapons, vehicles, and void ships of the expanding imperial military. On 100 worlds, the Mechanicum established new forge temples, spreading the worship of the Omnissiah alongside the expansion of the Imperium. Yet beneath this productive alliance, tensions simmered. The Mechanicum jealously guarded its technological secrets, even from the Emperor's representatives. The more conservative tech priests resented the accelerated pace of production demanded by the Great Crusade, seeing it as sacrificing proper reverence for efficiency. The progressive elements found themselves both empowered by new discoveries and constrained by the Emperor's prohibitions against certain technologies deemed too dangerous. Kelber navigated these complexities with calculating precision. He maintained the outward appearance of loyal cooperation while consolidating his personal authority within the Mechanicum. When forge temples on newly established worlds attempted to assert independence from Martian control, Kelber used imperial resources to bring them back into line. When imperial authorities questioned Mechanicum practices, he invoked the autonomy guaranteed by the Treaty of Mars. As the Great Crusade reached its height, the Fabricator General had transformed the Mechanicum into an empire within an empire. Mars and its daughter Forge worlds formed a technological fiefdom spanning hundreds of star systems, nominally part of the Imperium, but operating under its own laws, customs, and chain of command. The tech priests had access to technologies unknown even to the Emperor's inner circle, and maintained their own military forces independent of imperial command structures. This uneasy balance would hold through the early decades of the Great Crusade, as both the Imperium and the Mechanicum benefited too greatly from their alliance to risk its dissolution. The forges of Mars never ceased their production, turning out endless streams of weapons and equipment for the expanding Imperial war machine. The red planet glowed with the fires of industry visible even from orbit, its surface reshaped by massive excavations and construction projects. Few could have predicted that this technological powerhouse would become the site of a schism as devastating as any in human history. The seeds of that conflict lay buried in the contradictions of the Mechanicum itself, a society dedicated simultaneously to preservation and progress, to independence and alliance, to religious devotion and scientific inquiry. When those contradictions finally surfaced, they would tear Mars apart and forever alter the relationship between the keepers of humanity's technology and the Imperium they served. The first recorded communication between Terra and Mars came not through diplomatic channels, but via a simple Vox transmission. After centuries of isolation, Martian auger arrays detected unusual energy signatures from Terra, power outputs that had not been registered since before the Age of Strife. Kelber dispatched observation craft to the edge of Martian orbital space, their cogitators recording the unmistakable signs of advanced technology being wielded by someone who understood the old ways. The Emperor's arrival on Mars in the year 798 of the 30th millennium was deliberately staged to impress the tech priests. His flagship descended through the thin Martian atmosphere, landing on the dusty plains outside Olympus Mons with a precision that spoke of mastery over machinecraft that even the Mechanicum respected. The vessel itself was a marvel of technology, incorporating design elements that some of the senior magi recognized from ancient templates thought lost forever. The Emperor emerged alone, walking across the red sands toward the Mechanicum delegation. Witnesses described how his armor gleamed with a golden light that seemed to penetrate even the dust-laden atmosphere of Mars. More significantly to the tech priests, the subtle electromagnetic aura that surrounded him registered on their augmetic sensors as patterns eerily similar to those described in ancient texts about the Omnissiah. Fabricator General Kelber led the Martian delegation, his towering form heavily augmented with mechanical limbs and data processing enhancements. Accompanying him were representatives from the major forge temples, each bearing the distinctive modifications and insignia of their respective domains. The Emperor addressed them not in Gothic, but in perfect binary cant, the machine language of the Mechanicum, demonstrating a fluency that shocked even the most skeptical tech priests. The Emperor's knowledge of lost technologies proved decisive in these first meetings. He displayed understanding of principles that the Mechanicum had been struggling to rediscover for centuries. One senior Magos was said to have fallen to his knees when the Emperor casually corrected a calculation in a plasma containment formula that had eluded Martian theoreticians for generations. Such displays were carefully calculated. The Emperor needed the Mechanicum's vast industrial capacity for his planned Great Crusade, and knew that technological demonstrations would speak louder than any political promises. The formal recognition of the Emperor as the Omnissiah came after 3 days of meetings within the Olympus Mons temple complex. The Emperor presented the Mechanicum leadership with a gift, a complete STC database recovered from the vaults beneath the Ural Mountains on Terra. The database contained manufacturing templates for technologies considered mythical by the tech priests, including stable graviton impellers and molecular bonding techniques that would revolutionize voidship construction. Kelber Hal, ever the pragmatist, recognized the value of alliance with this being who commanded such knowledge. In a ceremony broadcast to all forged temples on Mars, he formally acknowledged the Emperor as the Omnissiah incarnate, the physical manifestation of the machine god that the cult Mechanicus had worshipped for millennia. The Emperor, despite his personal rejection of religion, accepted this designation as a necessary political accommodation. The Treaty of Mars, signed shortly afterward, established the framework for cooperation between Terra and Mars that would underpin the Imperium's technological infrastructure for the next 10,000 years. The document's most significant provisions included the Mechanicum's agreement to provide technical support for the Emperor's military forces, while maintaining autonomy in its internal governance and religious practices. In exchange, the Emperor guaranteed the Mechanicum exclusive rights to recover and study technology from worlds brought into the Imperium. This arrangement satisfied both parties' immediate needs, but contained contradictions that would eventually lead to conflict. The Emperor's secular imperial truth, which rejected all forms of religious worship, stood in fundamental opposition to the Mechanicum's faith-based approach to technology. For the moment, however, pragmatism prevailed over ideology. The technological exchange between Terra and Mars transformed both worlds. The Emperor provided the Mechanicum with access to preserved technologies from Terra's golden age, including partial SDC systems and designs for advanced weaponry. The Mechanicum contributed its manufacturing expertise and the vast industrial capacity of Mars. Within months, production facilities that had been crafting simple weapons and survival equipment were retooled to produce the instruments of interstellar conquest. Most significant among these early collaborative projects was the development of equipment for the Emperor's genetically enhanced warriors, the Legions Astartes. The power armor worn by these space marines represented a synthesis of Terran genetic science and Martian materials technology. The Mark II Crusade pattern armor, which would become standard issue during the early Great Crusade, featured servo motors and life support systems manufactured on Mars according to templates provided by the Emperor's scientists. The bolter, the iconic weapon of the Space Marines, similarly emerged from this collaboration. The Emperor's weaponsmiths provided the designs for the mass reactive shells, while Martian engineers perfected the manufacturing process that allowed these complex weapons to be produced in the quantities needed for the expanding legions. The Mechanicum also developed specialized variants like the heavy bolter and the bolt pistol, adapting the basic technology to different tactical requirements. Vehicle production represented another major area of cooperation. The Rhino SDC, rediscovered by Mechanicum explorators in the Martian outlands, was modified according to the Emperor's specifications to serve as the primary transport for Space Marine units. Similarly, the Land Raider, named after the explorator Arkin Land, who recovered its partial template from the deep archives, combined Martian manufacturing techniques with modifications designed to accommodate the larger physiology of the Astartes. Beyond equipment for the Space Marines, the Mechanicum contributed significantly to the broader Imperial war machine. The Leman Russ battle tank, originally designed as an agricultural vehicle, was weaponized and mass-produced on Mars to serve as the backbone of the Imperial Army's armored divisions. The Mechanicum's shipyards in Martian orbit began constructing the massive vessels that would transport the Emperor's forces across the galaxy, incorporating technologies that had been theoretical until the Alliance provided the resources to realize them. These technological achievements came at a price, however. The pace of production demanded by the Emperor's ambitious timetable for the Great Crusade often conflicted with the Mechanicum's ritualistic approach to manufacturing. Where tech priests traditionally spent months performing blessing rituals before activating new production lines, Imperial representatives now demanded activation within days. This pressure created the first serious tensions between the Allies, with some conservative tech priests viewing the accelerated schedules as technological heresy. The ideological contradictions between the Imperial truth and the cult Mechanicus became increasingly apparent as the Alliance matured. The Emperor's vision for humanity was fundamentally secular, rejecting all forms of religious worship as ignorant superstition that had held humanity back during the Age of Strife. Yet he had pragmatically accepted identification as the Omnissiah to secure the Mechanicum's allegiance, creating a theological exception that undermined the consistency of his own doctrine. For their part, many tech priests found ways to reconcile their beliefs with service to the Imperium. Some interpreted the Emperor's secular policies as applying only to the uninitiated masses, while the Mechanicum preserved the true faith in technological divinity. Others embraced the identification of the Emperor as the Omnissiah wholeheartedly, seeing the Great Crusade as a sacred mission to recover lost knowledge rather than merely a military campaign of conquest. This uneasy theological détente was maintained through careful compartmentalization. Imperial representatives on Mars respected the Mechanicum's religious practices, while tech priests assigned to Imperial expeditionary fleets moderated their more overt ritualistic behaviors. The Emperor himself rarely visited Mars after the initial treaty, delegating ongoing relations to trusted representatives who understood the delicate balance required. Kelber Hal navigated these contradictions with calculated ambiguity. To Imperial authorities, he presented himself as a pragmatic administrator focused on production quotas and technical support. To his fellow tech priests, he emphasized the Mechanicum's continued autonomy and the opportunities the Alliance created for the quest for knowledge. This dual messaging allowed him to strengthen his position as Fabricator General while managing the growing factions within the Mechanicum. The Great Crusade provided unprecedented opportunities for the Mechanicum to expand its influence beyond the Sol system. As the Emperor's forces reclaimed human-settled worlds, Mechanicum representatives accompanied them, seeking lost technologies and identifying planets suitable for establishing new Forge worlds. These explorator fleets, as they came to be known, operated with considerable autonomy within the broader structure of the Crusade. The first major explorator fleet departed Mars in the year 805 of the 30th millennium, led by Arch Magos Coriel Zeth of Olympus Mons. Her fleet accompanied the 12th Expeditionary Fleet of the Imperial Army, establishing a pattern of cooperation that would be replicated hundreds of times over the following decades. While Imperial forces focused on bringing worlds into compliance, Mechanicum personnel conducted systematic surveys of ancient human settlements, recovering partial STC templates and archaeotech artifacts. When planets with suitable industrial potential were identified, the Mechanicum moved quickly to establish new Forge worlds. Metalica, Lucius, Ryza, and dozens of other planets were transformed into industrial centers modeled after Mars itself. These new Forge worlds extended the Mechanicum's reach across the expanding Imperium, each developing specializations based on local resources and the particular interests of their founding tech priests. The relationship between these daughter Forge worlds and Mars was complex. While all acknowledged the authority of the Fabricator General and the primacy of Mars, distance, and the practical realities of interstellar travel granted them significant autonomy. Some, like Lucius, developed distinct theological interpretations of the cult Mechanicus, while others like Rhiza became known for technological innovations that sometimes pushed against orthodox Mechanicum doctrine. Kelberhal maintained control over this expanding network through a combination of political maneuvering and technological leverage. Key manufacturing processes remained exclusive to Mars, ensuring that even the most independent Forge worlds remained dependent on the Red Planet for certain critical components. The Fabricator General also placed loyalists in key positions on new Forge worlds, creating a network of informants who kept him apprised of any deviations from Martian orthodoxy. The Mechanicum's military forces also expanded significantly during this period. The Titan legions of the Collegia Titanica, previously confined to Mars and its immediate surroundings, were now deployed across the galaxy. New Titan legions were founded on the daughter Forge worlds, each developing its own traditions and combat doctrines while maintaining ties to Mars. The Legio Cybernetica similarly expanded its operations, deploying battle automata to support Imperial compliance actions. These military forces maintained a distinct chain of command, separate from the broader Imperial military structure. While they coordinated with Space Marine legions and Imperial army units during campaigns, they ultimately answered to their respective Forge lords, and through them, to the Fabricator General on Mars. This arrangement preserved the Mechanicum's autonomy, but created potential command conflicts that would later prove problematic. As the Great Crusade progressed, the technological exchange between Terra and Mars became increasingly one-sided. The Emperor's initial sharing of recovered SDC templates slowed as his attention turned to the expanding frontier of the Crusade. The Mechanicum, meanwhile, continued to provide the material foundation for Imperial expansion, manufacturing everything from Astartes equipment to the massive warships of the growing Imperial fleet. The shadow of Ulanor hung over the Imperium like a triumphant banner. In the wake of the greatest victory of the Great Crusade, with the Orc Empire shattered and its warlord dead, the Emperor made his momentous decision to return to Terra, leaving Horus Lupercal as Warmaster to oversee the ongoing conquest of the galaxy. This transition of power sent ripples throughout the Imperium's vast bureaucracy, military structure, and political landscape. For the Mechanicum, it presented both opportunity and uncertainty. Kelberhal had not attended the triumph on Ulanor in person. Instead, he had sent representatives while he remained on Mars, ostensibly overseeing critical production quotas. The truth was more calculated. The Fabricator General had no desire to be seen as merely another Imperial servant in the Emperor's grand ceremony. His absence was noted by many, including Horus himself, who recognized the political statement inherent in it. The first communication between the newly elevated Warmaster and the Fabricator General came within days of the Ulanor ceremony. Horus, ever the diplomat, reached out with a carefully worded message praising the Mechanicum's contributions to the recent victory. The weapons, vehicles, and logistical support that had made the campaign possible had all flowed from the Forges of Mars and its subsidiary worlds. Horus acknowledged this dependency directly, something the Emperor had often left implicit. Kelberhal's response was equally measured. He congratulated the Warmaster on his elevation and pledged the continued support of the Mechanicum to the Great Crusade. However, he also included subtle references to the mutual benefits of their alliance and the shared quest for recovered knowledge that bound their institutions together. To most Imperial officials, these would have seemed like diplomatic pleasantries. To Horus, who had learned to read between the lines of political communication during his years as the Emperor's foremost diplomat, the message was clear. The Mechanicum saw itself as a partner, not a subordinate. This initial exchange established the foundation for what would become an increasingly complex relationship. Over the following months, Horus cultivated direct lines of communication with the Fabricator General that bypassed the usual Imperial administrative channels. These communications were ostensibly focused on coordinating Mechanicum support for upcoming campaign theaters, but they also allowed both leaders to take each other's measure without intermediaries. What Horus discovered in these exchanges was a deep well of resentment within the Martian priesthood, carefully concealed beneath layers of protocol and binary cant. The War Master, with his exceptional talent for identifying and exploiting human weakness, recognized the potential this represented. Where the Emperor had demanded compliance from the Mechanicum while offering decreasing technological exchange, Horus began to hint at a more equitable partnership. The Mechanicum's frustrations regarding technological restrictions had been building since the earliest days of the alliance with the Imperium. The Emperor had established clear boundaries around certain fields of research, artificial intelligence, unrestricted genetic manipulation, warp technology beyond specific controlled applications, and certain weapons technologies deemed too destructive or unpredictable. These prohibitions were non-negotiable, enforced by Imperial observers embedded within major Mechanicum research facilities. For many tech priests, these restrictions represented an intolerable limitation on the quest for knowledge, the fundamental driving principle of their existence. The Emperor's justifications, centered around the dangers these technologies had posed during the Age of Strife, were met with skepticism within the higher echelons of the Mechanicum. They had preserved technological knowledge through millennia of darkness. Who was this conqueror to tell them which knowledge was permissible and which forbidden? Kelber Hal had long nurtured this resentment while publicly maintaining compliance with Imperial edicts. In secure data vaults beneath the Olympus Mons complex, he maintained archives of research considered heretical by Imperial standards. These archives included partial SDC templates recovered from pre-Strife ruins, theoretical work on machine consciousness that skirted the edge of the AI prohibition, and experimental data on technologies the Emperor had explicitly forbidden. The Fabricator General was careful to compartmentalize this forbidden research, ensuring that only his most trusted subordinates had access. Even within this inner circle, information was segregated, with few understanding the full scope of what was being preserved and developed. This compartmentalization protected both the research itself and Kelber Hal's position, providing plausible deniability if Imperial authorities ever discovered individual prohibited projects. Beyond Mars, similar research continued on isolated facilities scattered throughout Mechanicum territory. The Forge world of Cyclothraith, located in a region of space where warp storms made regular communication difficult, became a center for experimental work on technologies that manipulated the barrier between real space and the immaterium. On Arachnes, a supposedly minor mining outpost in the Ultima Segmentum, tech priests conducted extensive research on autonomous combat systems that pushed against the boundaries of permitted machine intelligence. These facilities operated under various official designations: archaeological research stations, manufacturing optimization centers, or environmental adaptation complexes that obscured their true purpose. They reported directly to Kelber Hal or his closest advisors, bypassing the standard Mechanicum administrative hierarchy. Resources were channeled to them through complex networks of requisition orders and supply transfers designed to hide their true scale and importance. The tech priests who staffed these facilities were selected for both their technical brilliance and their ideological alignment. Many were veterans of the early Great Crusade who had witnessed firsthand the Emperor's confiscation or destruction of technologies deemed dangerous. Others were younger adepts who chafed against the restrictions placed on their research by Imperial policy. All shared a belief that the Mechanicum's purpose, the recovery and advancement of human technology, transcended political allegiance to Terra. Horus's communications with Kelber Hal never explicitly acknowledged these forbidden research programs. Instead, the War Master made oblique references to the artificial constraints placed on technological development and the short-sightedness of policies that limited humanity's potential. He suggested that once the galaxy was conquered and stable, a reevaluation of research priorities might be appropriate. These hints, carefully crafted to maintain deniability, nonetheless conveyed a clear message. Horus understood the Mechanicum's frustrations and might prove more accommodating than his father. The Fabricator General responded with equal caution, neither confirming nor denying the existence of prohibited research. Instead, he focused on the philosophical underpinnings of the quest for knowledge, emphasizing the Mechanicum's historical mission to recover all technology lost during the Age of Strife. He lamented the practical necessities that sometimes required compromise with imperial authorities, while suggesting that such compromises should be temporary accommodations rather than permanent limitations. This dance of implication and deniability continued for months after Ulanor, establishing a foundation of mutual understanding without ever crossing into outright conspiracy. Both leaders recognized the value of maintaining plausible deniability while exploring the potential for a realignment of their relationship. For Horus, the Mechanicum represented an essential resource for his future plans, whatever those might be. For Kelber Hal, the War Master represented a potential ally who might grant the Mechanicum greater autonomy than the increasingly distant Emperor. The key intermediary in this developing relationship was Regulus, a senior Magos of the Mechanicum who had been assigned as the primary technical liaison to the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet, Horus's personal command. Regulus had served in this capacity since the early years of the Great Crusade, developing a rapport with the Primarch that few tech priests achieved with the Emperor's genetically engineered sons. Regulus's official role involved coordinating Mechanicum support for the 16th Legion's operations, overseeing everything from ammunition production to vehicle maintenance to the complex life support systems of their flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. This position gave him legitimate reasons to communicate regularly with both Horus's command staff and the highest levels of the Mechanicum hierarchy on Mars. It also provided cover for more sensitive exchanges. The Magos had been selected for this assignment by Kelber Hal personally, not merely for his technical expertise, but for his political reliability. Regulus shared the Fabricator General's frustration with imperial restrictions and his belief in the Mechanicum's right to technological autonomy. More importantly, he possessed the diplomatic skills to navigate the complex relationships between the Mechanicum, the Space Marine Legions, and the broader imperial administration. In the months following Ulanor, Regulus began to serve as a confidential messenger between Horus and Kelber Hal. His frequent travel between the Vengeful Spirit and Mars for consultation on technical matters allowed him to deliver communications too sensitive for even encrypted Vox transmission. These messages were often encoded in technical specifications or maintenance reports, their true meaning hidden beneath layers of technical jargon comprehensible only to the intended recipient. Through Regulus, Horus gained insight into the internal politics of the Mechanicum, the rivalries between Forge worlds, the ideological divisions among the priesthood, and the specific grievances that might be exploited. The War Master learned of the conservative faction that resented any innovation, the progressive elements that chafed at all restrictions, and the pragmatists who simply sought greater autonomy for their research. This knowledge allowed him to tailor his approach, emphasizing different aspects of his potential patronage to different factions within the Mechanicum. Regulus also served as Kelber Hal's eyes and ears within Horus's inner circle, reporting on the War Master's interactions with his brother Primarchs and the shifting power dynamics as the Emperor's absence from the Crusade created new political realities. The Magos noted which Primarch seemed resentful of Horus's elevation, which embraced it, and which appeared indifferent. This intelligence helped the Fabricator General assess the stability of the new command structure and the potential for exploiting divisions within it. Beyond his role as messenger and observer, Regulus actively worked to strengthen the bonds between the War Master and the Mechanicum leadership. He arranged for Mechanicum adepts with particular expertise to be assigned to the 16th Legion, ensuring that Horus's forces received priority technical support. He facilitated the transfer of newly developed weapon systems to the Sons of Horus for field testing, giving the War Master's Legion access to technology not yet widely distributed to other Imperial forces. The Magos also identified key individuals within both organizations who might be receptive to closer cooperation. On the Mechanicum side, he highlighted tech priests who had experienced direct interference with their research from Imperial authorities. Within Horus's command structure, he cultivated relationships with officers who appreciated the Mechanicum's contributions and might advocate for greater technological freedom. As these connections developed, Regulus began to receive more sensitive assignments from both of his masters. Kelberhal tasked him with assessing Horus's reaction to carefully selected information about prohibited research projects, gauging how far the War Master's tolerance for technological heresy might extend. Horus, in turn, instructed Regulus to identify Mechanicum facilities that might be amenable to direct patronage, bypassing Mars's authority structure. The implications of these developments were profound. The traditional relationship between the Imperium and the Mechanicum had been predicated on the Emperor's identification as the Omnissiah and the technological exchange established in the Treaty of Mars. As the Emperor withdrew to Terra for his mysterious projects, that relationship began to fray. Horus, sensing opportunity in this deterioration, positioned himself as an alternative patron who understood the Mechanicum's aspirations better than his father. For Kelberhal, these overtures represented a calculated risk. Aligning too closely with the War Master might provoke the Emperor's suspicion, potentially threatening the Mechanicum's autonomy. Yet maintaining the status quo meant accepting permanent limitations on technological development that many tech priests found intolerable. The Fabricator General's solution was to maintain official neutrality while exploring the possibilities of a closer relationship with Horus through deniable channels. This ambiguous situation persisted as the Great Crusade continued its inexorable expansion across the galaxy. On the surface, the alliance between the Imperium and the Mechanicum remained productive, with Mars continuing to supply the material needs of the conquest. Beneath that surface, however, the seeds of heresy were taking root, seeds that would eventually bloom into open conflict on the red plains of Mars itself. The first tremors of treachery reached Mars not as thunderous declarations, but as whispers. While Horus's corruption on Davin remained unknown to most of the Imperium, the War Master had already begun positioning his agents throughout key Imperial institutions. The Mechanicum, with its vast industrial capacity and technological knowledge, represented a prize too valuable to leave to chance. For this critical mission, Horus deployed two of his most effective operators, First Chaplain Erebus of the Word-Bearers and Magos Regulus, who had already proven his utility as a conduit between the War Master and the Fabricator General. Erebus arrived on Mars in the guise of an official emissary from the War Master, bearing formal communications regarding supply requisitions for the ongoing campaigns of the Great Crusade. His Crimson Power armor, adorned with scriptures and devotional scrolls, marked him clearly as a son of Lorgar. The Word-Bearer's reputation for diplomatic skill and cultural sensitivity made Erebus a logical choice for an embassy to the tradition-bound Mechanicum. What few realized was that beneath his formal diplomatic credentials lay a far more subversive purpose. The first chaplain was granted quarters in the diplomatic sector of Olympus Mons, ostensibly to facilitate communications between the War Master's staff and the Mechanicum leadership. From this position, he began a careful campaign of influence, scheduling private meetings with key members of the Martian priesthood. These discussions, framed as theological exchanges between the spiritual leaders of two allied organizations, provided cover for Erebus to assess which tech priests might be receptive to Horus's overtures. Magos Regulus operated with greater subtlety, leveraging his established position within the Mechanicum hierarchy. Where Erebus was visibly present as an outsider, Regulus moved through the Forge temples and research facilities as a trusted insider. His augmetic enhancements and fluency in binary cant allowed him access to spaces and conversations that would have been closed to even the most diplomatic space marine. Together, these two agents formed a formidable team, approaching the Mechanicum's potential defection from complementary angles. Their first target was not Kelberhal himself, but the circle of senior tech priests who formed his inner council. Foremost among these was Adept Lucas Chrome, the Fabricator General's most trusted advisor and the overseer of Mars's orbital shipyards. Chrome had long harbored resentment toward Imperial restrictions on certain weapons technologies, particularly those involving warp-based systems that he believed essential for advancing voidship capabilities. Erebus approached Chrome with carefully calculated reverence, expressing fascination with the Adepts' theoretical work on warp interface technology. During their meetings, the word-bearer subtly steered conversations toward the limitations imposed by imperial policy, expressing concern that such restrictions might leave humanity vulnerable to Xenos threats lurking in the unexplored reaches of the galaxy. Without explicitly criticizing the Emperor, Erebus planted seeds of doubt about whether Terra's leadership truly understood the technological necessities of safeguarding mankind's future. Simultaneously, Regulus provided Chrome with confidential technical data from frontier expeditions, purportedly showing Xeno civilizations developing technologies similar to those the Imperium had forbidden. These reports, fabricated by Horus's intelligence network, suggested that humanity was falling behind potential adversaries due to self-imposed limitations. The implication was clear. The Emperor's prohibitions were not only frustrating, but potentially existentially dangerous. This two-pronged approach, theological doubt from Erebus and technical anxiety from Regulus, proved effective with Chrome and several other senior tech priests. They began to meet privately, away from the monitoring systems that Imperial observers had installed in major Mechanicum facilities. In these meetings, they expressed growing concern about the trajectory of the Imperium and the Mechanicum's place within it. Regulus carefully recorded these conversations, identifying which grievances resonated most strongly and which tech priests seemed most amenable to a change in allegiance. While this inner circle was being cultivated, Erebus expanded his influence to the broader Mechanicum hierarchy. He arranged for word-bearers vessels to deliver rare archaeotech artifacts to Mars as gifts from the War Master, ensuring these deliveries bypassed the usual Imperial cataloging procedures that might have confiscated prohibited technology. These gifts were strategically distributed to Forge Lords and Research Magisters whose support would be valuable, creating a network of tech priests who associated Horus with technological largesse and fewer restrictions. The most significant of these gifts arrived aboard a word-bearer's strike cruiser that docked at Mars's high orbital station in the guise of requiring repairs. Hidden within its cargo holds were data crystals containing partial STC templates recovered from the ruins of Orlia, a human colony devastated during the Age of Strife. These templates contained designs for neural interfacing technology that skirted dangerously close to artificial intelligence, technology explicitly forbidden by Imperial decree. Rather than surrendering these findings to Imperial authorities as required, Erebus delivered them directly to Kelber Hal as a personal gift from the War Master. This offering represented exactly the kind of technological knowledge the Mechanicum most craved, and precisely the sort that the Emperor had restricted. The message was unmistakable. Horus understood the Mechanicum's true desires and was willing to satisfy them in ways his father was not. Kelber Hal received this gift with outward caution, but inward excitement, storing the data crystals in his private vaults while considering their implications for his relationship with the War Master. As these material inducements softened resistance among the Mechanicum leadership, Erebus began introducing more radical notions. In private conversations with the most receptive tech priests, he spoke of ancient technologies that transcended the material realm, technologies that interfaced with the warp in ways that current Imperial science could barely comprehend. These discussions were framed not as heresy, but as the logical extension of the quest for knowledge, suggesting that artificial divisions between different types of technology were philosophical errors rather than meaningful distinctions. For tech priests who had dedicated their existence to the pursuit of knowledge, this argument held powerful appeal. The cult Mechanicus had always taught that all technology was sacred. The Emperor's prohibitions seemed increasingly arbitrary when viewed through this theological lens. Erebus, with his background in religious manipulation, expertly exploited this contradiction, positioning Horus as a leader who respected the Mechanicum's spiritual mission rather than imposing secular limitations upon it. Regulus complemented these philosophical seductions with practical incentives. He arranged for Mechanicum adepts who showed sympathy toward Horus's position to receive priority access to research facilities, expedition resources, and rare materials. Those who expressed skepticism found their requisitions delayed, their research grants reduced, and their advancement prospects diminished. This system of rewards and punishments, implemented through Regulus's extensive network within the Mechanicum bureaucracy, created institutional pressure toward alignment with the War Master's interests. The corruption of Mars occurred not only at the highest levels, but also spread throughout the forge complexes that formed the industrial heart of the Mechanicum. In the Mondus Gamma Forge, overseen by Adept Lucas Chrome, production lines that had been manufacturing standard pattern bolters for the Imperial forces began producing modified versions with enhanced firing mechanisms, modifications that had not received proper Imperial certification. These weapons were shipped exclusively to legions and army units under Horus's direct command, creating a growing technological disparity between the War Master's forces and those loyal to Terra. Similar unauthorized modifications appeared in other forge complexes across Mars. The Olympus Mons production facilities began incorporating experimental power field generators into Terminator armor destined for the Sons of Horus and other legions close to the War Master. The Mondus Oculum Forge, specializing in augmetic enhancements, developed neural interfaces that offered enhanced reaction times but risked psychological side effects. These too were channeled exclusively to Horus's favored units. These technological divergences, while seemingly minor, represented a significant breakdown in the standardization protocols that had governed Imperial military equipment since the beginning of the Great Crusade. They also created practical dependencies between the forces most loyal to Horus and the Mechanicum facilities providing their specialized equipment, binding their fates together in ways that would become crucial once open conflict erupted. The most disturbing developments occurred in the sealed research facilities beneath Mars's surface. In chambers accessible only to the highest-ranking tech priests, experiments began on technologies that incorporated components recovered from Xeno's artifacts, another explicit violation of Imperial prohibitions. These experiments, conducted under Kelberhal's tacit approval, focused particularly on technologies that could interface with or manipulate the warp, drawing on forbidden knowledge that resonated with the powers Horus himself was beginning to embrace. Erebus took a particular interest in these research programs, providing theoretical frameworks that helped the Mechanicum researchers interpret their findings. These frameworks, derived from the demonic lore the word-bearers had accumulated through their secret worship of the Chaos gods, guided the experiments toward outcomes that would serve the War Master's corrupted agenda. The tech priests involved remained largely unaware of the true source of these insights, believing they were simply benefiting from the word-bearers' archaeological discoveries on distant worlds. As these corrupting influences spread through the Mechanicum hierarchy, the first instances of scrap code began to appear in Mars's noospheric networks. Scrap code, viral machine language that corrupted data and infected systems, manifested initially as minor glitches in non-critical systems, inventory databases showing phantom entries, maintenance schedules rearranging themselves, communication relays experiencing momentary failures. These incidents were dismissed as routine technical problems, with affected systems purged and restored from backups. What few recognized was that each purge and restoration left microscopic fragments of the corruption behind, embedded in the deepest layers of the system architecture. These fragments remained dormant, undetectable by standard diagnostic protocols, slowly spreading through the interconnected networks that regulated every aspect of Martian industry and research. They represented not random failures, but the early stages of a coordinated attack on the Mechanicum's technological infrastructure, an attack orchestrated by forces that understood machine systems on a level beyond conventional comprehension. The source of this scrap code remained unclear even to most of those who had aligned themselves with Horus. Erebus and a small circle of the most corrupted tech priests understood its true nature. It was the digital manifestation of chaos influence, the technological equivalent of the spiritual corruption spreading through the War Master's forces. Just as chaos could infect the human mind and soul, it could infect the machine spirits that the Mechanicum believed inhabited their technology, turning these spirits from servants to saboteurs. The infection spread most rapidly through systems connected to the experimental technologies being developed with Erebus's guidance. Tech priests working on these projects began experiencing unusual phenomena, augmetic components malfunctioning in patterns that seemed almost purposeful data storage devices containing information the priests had no memory of recording, machine spirits exhibiting behaviors more akin to sentience than the limited autonomy they should have possessed. These incidents were carefully documented by Regulus and shared with only the most trusted members of the conspiracy, who recognized them as signs of their imminent ascension rather than warnings of catastrophe. By the time the War Master's treachery became open knowledge following the massacre at Istvan III, Mars was already compromised beyond recovery. The noospheric infection had spread to critical systems throughout the planet. The leadership had been suborned through a combination of ideological manipulation and technological temptation, and production facilities had been realigned to support Horus's forces rather than those loyal to the Emperor. What remained was to transform this hidden corruption into open rebellion, a transformation that would begin with the appropriately named Death of Innocence. Magma City stood as an anomaly among the forge complexes of Mars, both in its architecture and philosophy. Unlike the somber, utilitarian structures that dominated most of the Red Planet's industrial landscape, Coriol Zeth's domain rose from the dusty plains with an aesthetic that harkened back to humanity's golden age. Gleaming spires of adamantium and ferrocrete stretched skyward, their surfaces etched with mathematical formulas rather than the usual religious iconography of the Mechanicum. The Forge Temple at its heart featured vast crystal domes that allowed natural light to flood workspaces, a radical departure from the enclosed, artificially illuminated environments preferred by most tech priests. This architectural distinctiveness reflected the unconventional mindset of its mistress. Mago's Coriol Zeth had risen through the Mechanicum hierarchy, not through political maneuvering or religious orthodoxy, but through sheer brilliance in theoretical applications and practical engineering. Her specialization in energy systems had revolutionized plasma containment protocols across the Mechanicum, earning her the grudging respect of even her most conservative peers. When granted control of her own forge complex, she had deliberately broken with tradition, creating an environment that prioritized efficiency and innovation over ritual and dogma. Zeth herself was less extensively augmented than most magi of her rank. Where many tech priests replaced limbs and organs at the first opportunity, she retained much of her original biology, limiting her mechanical enhancements to those that directly improved her cognitive functions and technical capabilities. Her most notable augmentation was a complex neural interface that allowed direct communion with machine systems at unprecedented speeds. This interface, designed by Zeth herself, represented exactly the kind of innovation that made traditionalists uncomfortable. It improved upon established Mechanicum technology rather than merely preserving it. The philosophical divergence between Zeth and the Mechanicum orthodoxy extended far beyond aesthetics. While the dominant faction under Kelber Hal viewed technology as something to be venerated and preserved, Zeth approached it as a tool for human advancement. She rejected the notion that innovation was dangerous, arguing instead that stagnation posed the greater threat to humanity's future. Most controversially, she questioned the religious framework that had come to dominate Mechanicum thinking, suggesting that the veneration of technology as divine had become an obstacle to understanding it properly. These views had made Zeth a polarizing figure within the Mechanicum hierarchy. To younger tech priests frustrated by the constraints of tradition, she represented a beacon of progressive thinking. To conservatives, she embodied dangerous radicalism that threatened to undermine the foundations of their faith. Kelber Hal had tolerated her primarily because her technical contributions were too valuable to discard, but the Fabricator General had always kept her isolated from positions of broader influence within the Mechanicum. Magma City's greatest project, and the one that would ultimately seal Zeth's fate, was the development of the Akashic Reader. This remarkable device represented the culmination of decades of theoretical work on the nature of information storage and retrieval. The underlying premise was revolutionary. Zeth hypothesized that all human knowledge, from the dark age of technology and beyond, continued to exist in the form of electromagnetic imprints on the fabric of reality itself. The Akashic Reader was designed to detect, decode, and retrieve these imprints, potentially giving humanity access to all the technological knowledge lost during the Age of Strife. The implications of such a device were staggering. If successful, it would render the painstaking quest for STC fragments obsolete. Instead of scouring the galaxy for physical remnants of humanity's technological peak, the Mechanicum could simply extract the information directly from the universe itself. Entire fields of lost technology could be recovered in days rather than centuries. The balance of power between Mars and Terra would shift dramatically, as the Mechanicum would no longer depend on the Emperor's expeditionary fleets to recover technology from distant worlds. Work on the Akashic Reader proceeded in a specially constructed chamber deep within Magma City. The device itself resembled a massive geodesic sphere composed of interlocking crystalline components, surrounded by concentric rings of superconducting material. Power was supplied by a compact plasma reactor of Szeth's own design, capable of generating energy outputs that rivaled small starship engines. The control systems incorporated both conventional cogitators and more experimental neural interfaces that allowed tech priests to guide the device's operations through direct mental connection. Initial tests had shown promising results. The reader had successfully recovered fragments of technical data from the early Martian colonies, information that matched historical records but included details not preserved in any known archive. These early successes convinced Szeth that her theoretical framework was sound, though the device required significant refinement before it could reach deeper into humanity's technological past. News of these developments could not be contained within Magma City. The Mechanicum's internal information networks hummed with rumors about Szeth's project, ranging from skeptical dismissal to near messianic expectations. These rumors eventually reached the highest levels of the hierarchy, prompting increasing scrutiny from both Kelber Hal's inner circle and the more conservative elements of the priesthood. The first formal challenge came from Adept Lucas Chrome, who dispatched a delegation of senior tech priests to inspect the Akashic Reader project under the pretext of a routine compliance assessment. These inspectors, heavily augmented figures whose mechanical bodies concealed their true allegiance to Horus's cause, arrived at Magma City with a predetermined agenda to find grounds for shutting down Szeth's work. Szeth received the delegation with reluctant courtesy, providing access to the reader's technical specifications while withholding certain theoretical components she considered proprietary. The inspectors spent days examining the device, interrogating Szeth's research staff, and reviewing test data. Their questions revealed their underlying concerns, not about the reader's functionality, but about its implications for the Mechanicum's traditional approach to knowledge acquisition. The delegation's report to Chrome was damning. It characterized the Akashic Reader as an attempt to circumvent the divinely ordained quest for knowledge through prohibited shortcuts, and suggested that its operation involved principles adjacent to forbidden technologies. Most significantly, it highlighted the project's potential to undermine the authority structure of the Mechanicum by democratizing access to technological information that had previously been controlled by the senior priesthood. Armed with this report, Chrome moved to bring the matter before the Fabricator General. In a private meeting within Kelber Hal's sanctum, he presented the case against Szeth, emphasizing not just the theological concerns, but the political implications. If the Akashic Reader succeeded, Szeth's influence would grow exponentially, potentially challenging Kelber Hal's authority and disrupting the careful balance of power the Fabricator General had established with Horus. Kelber Hal recognized the threat immediately. While he had little personal investment in the religious orthodoxy Chrome invoked, he understood that Szeth's innovation represented a wild variable in his carefully calculated plans. The Akashic Reader, if successful, would decrease the Mechanicum's dependency on the archaeological expeditions controlled by Horus, potentially giving Mars more autonomy than the Fabricator General desired in the current political climate. More concerning still, it might recover information about technologies the War Master had promised to permit, technologies that would be recognized as dangerous by those still loyal to the Emperor. the Fabricator General's response was characteristically indirect. Rather than issuing an outright condemnation, he established a special oversight committee to ensure the theological compliance of the Akashic Reader project. This committee, composed entirely of tech priests aligned with Chrome and the conservative faction, received authority to modify or halt aspects of the project they deemed problematic. It was a death sentence by bureaucracy, designed to strangle Szeth's work in red tape rather than martyring her with a direct prohibition. Szeth recognized the maneuver for what it was. Having navigated Martian politics for decades, she understood that the Oversight Committee would systematically dismantle her project if given the opportunity. In response, she accelerated the Reader's development schedule, pushing her research team to complete critical components before the committee could fully establish its authority. Working through several cycles without rest, Szeth personally refined the device's detection mechanisms, improving their sensitivity by an order of magnitude. This race against administrative interference might have succeeded had external events not intervened. As Szeth's team approached a breakthrough, disturbing reports began to reach Mars from the Istvan system. The exact nature of these events remained confused, with contradictory information flowing through official channels, but rumors of betrayal and Legion fighting Legion spread through the Mechanicum's ranks. These developments created a pretext for Kelber Hal to implement heightened security measures across all Forge complexes, measures that placed additional restrictions on Szeth's already constrained operations. Simultaneously, more subtle attacks began targeting Magma City systems. Scrapcode infections appeared in peripheral networks, corrupting data archives and disrupting power distribution. These digital assaults bore the hallmarks of the mysterious malfunctions that had been affecting other Martian facilities, but they occurred with greater frequency and precision in Szeth's domain. Her tech priests found themselves fighting a constant battle against these infections, diverting crucial resources from the Akashic Reader project to maintain basic Forge functions. The source of these attacks remained officially unidentified, but Szeth's security protocols traced several back to systems within Mondus Gamma, Lucas Chrome's territory. When she presented this evidence to the Mechanicum's central security apparatus, her complaints were dismissed as inconclusive and potentially misattributed. This deliberate blindness confirmed what Szeth had suspected. The highest levels of the Mechanicum hierarchy were complicit in the campaign against her work. As these pressures mounted, Szeth faced growing isolation within the broader Mechanicum community. Tech priests who had previously collaborated with Magma City found their own projects scrutinized if they maintained those connections. Research grants were mysteriously reduced or redirected. Supply requisitions faced increasing delays. This systematic ostracism extended beyond professional relationships to personal ones, as tech priests who counted Szeth as a mentor or friend found themselves passed over for advancement opportunities. The most damaging blow came when Fabricator General Kelber Hal issued a directive reclassifying certain energy transmission technologies used in the Akashic Reader as restricted materials, requiring special authorization for continued use. This authorization would come, naturally, from the same oversight committee already working to obstruct Szeth's progress. The directive effectively created a legal framework for shutting down the Reader entirely, while maintaining the pretense of reasonable regulation rather than targeted censure. Faced with this existential threat to her life's work, Szeth made a fateful decision. Rather than submitting to the Oversight Committee or engaging in a bureaucratic battle she could not win, she would complete one full operational test of the Akashic Reader before the new restrictions could be implemented. If successful, the test would provide irrefutable proof of the device's value, potentially generating enough support within the Mechanicum to overcome even Kelber Hal's opposition. Preparations for this desperate gambit proceeded in secret. Szeth compartmentalized information among her most trusted staff, ensuring that no single breach could compromise the entire operation. She rerouted power from secondary systems, creating independent energy reserves that could sustain the Reader even if Magma City's main reactors were shut down. Most critically, she established a secure data repository disconnected from the main noospheric network, where the Reader's findings could be preserved even if the device itself was seized. As these preparations neared completion, Szeth received an unexpected communication from an unfamiliar source. The message arrived through channels outside the standard Mechanicum networks, encoded in an archaic binary format that few modern tech priests would recognize. It came from Dalia Cythera, a junior adept serving aboard the Emperor's flagship, the Bucephalus, currently in orbit around Terra. The content was brief but electrifying. Cythera claimed to be working on a project with remarkable similarities to the Akashic Reader, under the direct supervision of the Emperor himself. This revelation transformed Szeth's understanding of her situation. If the Emperor was pursuing similar technology, then the opposition from Kelber Hal and his allies took on a more sinister aspect. Were they acting merely to preserve their own authority, or were they deliberately obstructing technology the Emperor deemed valuable? The implications aligned disturbingly well with the confused reports from Istvan, suggesting a schism that extended far beyond Martian politics. Szeth composed a careful response to Cythera, sharing limited technical details about the reader while requesting more information about the Emperor's project. She dispatched this message through the same secure channel, hoping it would reach Terra without interception. Whether this communication would bring salvation or further danger remained uncertain, but it represented a potential alliance Szeth desperately needed. With this tenuous connection to Terra established, Szeth accelerated the final preparations for the reader's test. Her tech priests worked in shifts around the clock, making minute adjustments to the crystalline components and refining the neural interfaces. Power systems were checked and rechecked, backup protocols established, and security measures enhanced. Throughout Magma City, loyal staff implemented defensive measures against both physical intrusion and scrapcode attacks, creating a fortress around the reader's chamber. The gathering storm was now impossible to ignore. Throughout Mars, forge complexes aligned themselves with either Kelber Hal or Terra, stockpiling weapons and securing vital infrastructure. Titans of the Legio Tempestus conducted training maneuvers suspiciously close to Magma City, while Szeth's few allies among other Forge Lords reported similar intimidation tactics. The Mechanicum stood on the brink of civil war, with the Akashic Reader representing just one front in a conflict that would soon engulf the entire Red Planet. The Red Dawn of Rebellion broke over Mars with neither fanfare nor formal declaration. In the command spire of Olympus Mons, Fabricator General Kelber Hal gathered his inner circle, 13 of the most senior magi, each representing a major forge complex loyal to his cause. Their augmented bodies stood in perfect mechanical stillness as data streams flickered between them, communicating at speeds no unmodified human could comprehend. The decision had already been made. This gathering merely confirmed the timing. Kelber Hal's mechadendrites unfurled to interface with the central cogitator plinth. His voice, stripped of emotion by countless augmentations, echoed through the chamber. Mars stands with the War Master. With this simple pronouncement, the Mechanicum, humanity's keeper of technology for thousands of years, formally severed its ties with the Emperor and the Imperium he had built. The transmission of this declaration spread across Mars through secured noospheric channels, reaching only those forge complexes and tech priests deemed sympathetic to the cause. Simultaneously, the first salvos of what would become known as the Schism of Mars were already underway, implemented with the cold precision characteristic of the Mechanicum's approach to warfare. In the orbital shipyards above the Red Planet, tech priests loyal to Kelber Hal activated hidden scrapcode routines that had been embedded in critical systems months earlier. Defense platforms that had protected Mars for centuries suddenly turned their weapons on vessels identified as loyal to Terra. Cargo ships carrying supplies for the Imperial Palace found their navigation systems compromised, driving them into collision courses with one another. Astropathic relay stations throughout the system experienced catastrophic failures, isolating Mars from communication with Terra at the precise moment coordination was most needed. The strategic brilliance of Kelber Hal's opening moves lay in their asymmetry. Rather than launching a conventional military assault that would trigger immediate response, he implemented a multi-layered systems collapse that paralyzed the loyalist forces before they could organize. Defensive networks designed to protect against external threats found themselves compromised from within, their machine spirits corrupted by viral scrap code that spread through their systems like a technological cancer. This digital assault was most devastating in the Mundus Oculum Forge complex, which housed Mars's primary defensive cogitators. The facility had been constructed during the early days of the Mechanicum, built into the rim of an ancient impact crater, and expanded over centuries into a labyrinthine complex of computation chambers and weapon control centers. Its cogitator cores coordinated the automated defense lasers that protected Martian airspace, the void shields that shielded critical infrastructure, and the early warning systems that monitored the surrounding space. Adept Lucas Chrome had personally overseen the infiltration of Mundus Oculum months earlier, inserting loyalists into key technical positions and gradually replacing standard operating protocols with corrupted versions. When activated, these protocols caused the defense lasers to recalibrate their targeting parameters, identifying loyal Mechanicum vessels as hostile while allowing traitor forces free movement. Void shields protecting Loyalist Forge complexes fluctuated and failed, leaving them vulnerable to orbital bombardment. Most critically, the early warning systems began generating false readings, reporting non-existent attack formations that drew Loyalist forces into carefully prepared ambushes. The capture of Mundus Oculum represented more than a tactical advantage. It was a symbolic victory that demonstrated the traitors' technological superiority. The complex had been designed to be impregnable, its systems isolated and redundant specifically to prevent the kind of subversion that Chrome had achieved. Its fall within hours of Kelber Hal's declaration sent a clear message to wavering Forge lords. Resistance was not merely futile but technically impossible against adversaries who could corrupt the very machines on which the Mechanicum relied. Simultaneously with the electronic warfare campaign, more conventional military assets moved against strategic targets across the Martian surface. The Legio Mortis, a Titan legion whose loyalty Kelber Hal had secured through promises of technological advancement beyond imperial restrictions, deployed from its fortress hangars near Syria Planum. Massive war machines, some standing over 40 meters tall, advanced across the rust-red landscape, their weapons capable of reducing even the most heavily fortified forge complexes to molten slag. The Legio Mortis targeted transportation hubs first, severing the physical connections between loyalist strongholds. Rail networks that transported materials and personnel between forge complexes were destroyed by precision strikes, while atmospheric craft attempting to establish alternative supply lines found themselves hunted by corrupted defense turrets. Within 12 hours of the initial declaration, each loyalist forge stood isolated, unable to coordinate defense or share resources. This isolation proved particularly devastating for the Mundus Gamma Forge complex, which had remained loyal to the Emperor despite its proximity to traitor-held territories. Overseen by Magos Vedius Telok, a conservative tech priest who nonetheless rejected Kelber Hal's treachery, Mundus Gamma housed critical production facilities for Astartes power armor components and specialized ammunition types. Its strategic value made it an early priority target for the traitor forces. The assault on Mundus Gamma began with a bombardment from corrupted defense lasers controlled through the captured Mundus Oculum systems. These precision strikes targeted the Forge's void shield generators, creating localized failures that allowed subsequent attacks to penetrate the complex's outer defenses. As the shields fluctuated, Legio Cybernetica cohorts, battle automata whose machine spirits had been corrupted through scrapcode infection, breached the perimeter walls, engaging the Forge's defensive Scitarii regiments in close-quarters combat. The battle for Mundus Gamma exemplified the horror of Mechanicum civil war. Identical combat units faced each other across manufacturing halls, their standard tactical protocols rendered useless against opponents designed with the same specifications. Scitarii Rangers, their bodies enhanced with the same augmetics regardless of allegiance, exchanged galvanic rifle fire across assembly lines still hot from recent production. Tech priests turned forge equipment into improvised weapons, reprogramming industrial servo arms to crush opponents or redirecting molten metal flows to create impassable barriers. Magos Telok coordinated the defense from a hardened command bunker beneath the main forge temple, using redundant communication systems isolated from the corrupted noosphere. His defensive strategy focused on protecting the forge's central cogitator vault, which contained both irreplaceable technical data and the master control systems for the complex's automated defenses. If this vault could be held, Mondus Gamma might survive long enough for reinforcements to arrive from Terra. This hope proved futile. 18 hours into the siege, a specialized strike force of Thalax units, cyborg shock troops whose heavily augmented bodies housed weapons systems normally mounted on vehicles, breached the lower levels of the complex through maintenance tunnels. These tunnels, designed for servitor access to critical infrastructure, had been mapped by traitor agents months earlier and incorporated into the assault plan. The Thalax cohort, moving with the precision of machines, but retaining enough human intuition to adapt to resistance, reached the cogitator vault before the defenders could seal the final blast doors. The fall of Mondus Gamma resonated across Mars as a demonstration of the traitor's tactical superiority. Within 24 hours of Kelber Hal's declaration, one of the most heavily defended Loyalist strongholds had been neutralized. The Forge's manufacturing capabilities were quickly repurposed to produce weapons and equipment for the traitor forces, while its stockpiles of completed materiel were distributed to units participating in assaults on other Loyalist positions. While these conventional military operations unfolded across the Martian surface, a more insidious campaign targeted the planet's noospheric network. The noosphere, the digital information space that connected all Mechanicum systems, had evolved over centuries from a simple data-sharing mechanism into a complex ecosystem that some tech priests regarded as a manifestation of the machine god's consciousness. This quasi-mystical network processed and distributed information across the entire planet, allowing forge complexes to coordinate production, share research, and monitor resource allocation. The corruption of the noosphere began with subtle data manipulations rather than outright destruction. Scrap code inserted into the system created false production reports, causing Loyalist forges to believe their allies were manufacturing specific components, when in reality those production lines had been redirected to traitor priorities. Research data was subtly altered, introducing errors into technical specifications that caused catastrophic failures when implemented. Resource allocation systems diverted critical materials away from Loyalist projects, creating shortages that paralyzed manufacturing at crucial moments. As the noospheric corruption spread, it took on characteristics that defied conventional technological understanding. Tech priests who interfaced directly with corrupted systems reported experiencing sensory phenomena impossible to explain through standard Mechanicum doctrine. Voices offering technical knowledge in exchange for specific actions, visual hallucinations of impossible mechanical configurations, and compulsions to perform modifications to equipment that served no apparent function. Those who resisted these influences often found their own augmetics turning against them, mechanical limbs moving contrary to their commands, or optical implants displaying images designed to induce psychological breakdown. The source of this corruption remained unclear to most tech priests, but at the highest levels of Kelber Hal's inner circle, the truth was known. The scrap code infecting Mars's systems was not merely a sophisticated computer virus, but something far more dangerous. The digital manifestation of chaos influence, a technological demonic possession that transformed the machine spirits of Mars from loyal servants into corrupted entities that hungered for destruction and perversion of their original purpose. This corruption reached its apex in the assault on Magma City, where Coriel Zeth's Akashic Reader represented both a strategic threat to the traitors' plans and an ideological affront to their newfound allegiance. Unlike the brute force approach used against Mondus Gamma, the attack on Magma City was orchestrated personally by adept Lucas Chrome, who understood that Zeth's technological brilliance required a more subtle approach. The assault began not with visible military action, but with an unprecedented scrap code attack targeting the unique systems architecture Szeth had developed for Magma City. This architecture, designed specifically to facilitate innovation rather than merely preserve existing technology, proved both a strength and vulnerability. Its adaptability allowed Szeth's tech priests to respond quickly to initial corruption attempts, isolating affected systems and implementing countermeasures. However, this same adaptability created pathways through which more sophisticated scrap code could infiltrate once initial defenses were overcome. Chrome's attack exploited this vulnerability through a multi-stage infection process. The first wave of scrap code targeted peripheral systems, environmental controls, non-critical manufacturing units, administrative data networks, forcing Szeth's defenders to commit resources to containing these breaches. While these defensive operations were underway, a second, more sophisticated wave attacked the isolation protocols themselves, creating microscopic bridges between supposedly separated networks. Through these nearly undetectable connections, the third and most dangerous phase of the assault infiltrated the core systems controlling the Akashic Reader itself. Szeth recognized the pattern too late. By the time her diagnostic systems identified the core infiltration, the scrap code had already begun subtly modifying the reader's operational parameters. These modifications were designed not to prevent the device from functioning, but to corrupt its function in ways that would serve the traitor's purposes. Rather than connecting to the pure knowledge Szeth sought to recover, the compromised reader would open connections to something far more dangerous, the warp itself, unfiltered by the protective systems that made conventional warp technology relatively safe. The Titan legions had long been the most visible symbol of Mars's military might. These towering war engines, some standing over 50 meters tall, embodied the pinnacle of Mechanicum weapons technology. Each Titan represented thousands of years of accumulated knowledge, their plasma reactors and void shield generators incorporating principles barely understood even by the tech priests who maintained them. More than mere weapons, they were venerated as avatars of the machine god, their machine spirits more complex and willful than those of lesser constructs. When the Schism erupted across Mars, the Collegia Titanica found itself torn apart along the same ideological fault lines that had fractured the broader Mechanicum. Princeps and Moderati, who had fought alongside one another for centuries now, found themselves on opposite sides of an unthinkable conflict. The bond between crew and machine, a connection so intimate that many Princeps considered their Titans extensions of their own bodies, became the battleground for a war of technological corruption and ideological subversion. The Legio Mortis, known colloquially as the Death's Heads, had been among the first to align with Kelber Hal and the War Master. Their fall had begun months before the open conflict, when fabricator Locum Kane noted unusual modification requests coming from their fortress monastery in Syria Planum. Components for their god machines were being altered with non-standard configurations that bypassed traditional machine spirit protocols. When questioned, the Legio's Grand Master cited combat optimization and leveraged his ancient charter of technical autonomy to continue the modifications without oversight. These alterations went far beyond conventional upgrades. Deep within the armored hulls of the Death's Head's Titans, tech priests aligned with Kelber Hal installed pulsing crystalline matrices that interfaced directly with the machine's plasma reactors. These crystals, harvested from sites where the barrier between real space and the warp had grown thin, resonated with energies that conventional Mechanicum scanning equipment could barely detect. When activated, they created feedback loops in the Titan's machine spirits, amplifying their aggression and bloodlust while suppressing the caution and restraint that normally prevented these war engines from exceeding safety parameters. The first deployment of these corrupted Titans came during the assault on Magma City. As Coriel Szeth's tech priests fought to contain the scrap code infection in their systems, long-range Auspex arrays detected the approach of 4 massive war machines, a Warmonger-class Titan leading 3 Warlord-class engines. Their distinctive skull-faced carapaces, once a proud tradition of the Legio Mortis, now appeared genuinely monstrous as corruption manifested physically in their structures. Viewports glowed with unnatural light, Exhausts belched smoke that formed momentary patterns resembling screaming faces, and their weapons dripped with fluids that metal should not produce. Magma City possessed no titans of its own to counter this threat. Szeth had always prioritized research and production over military assets, maintaining only a modest Skitarii security force supplemented by automated defense turrets. Against conventional attackers, these defenses might have held long enough for reinforcement from allied forge complexes. Against corrupted god machines, they were hopelessly outmatched. The Death's Heads advanced with unnatural coordination, their machine spirits exhibiting a predatory intelligence that veteran observers found disturbing. Rather than the methodical, sometimes ponderous movement typical of Titans, these corrupted engines stalked forward with fluid grace, anticipating defensive responses before they occurred. When Magma City's defense lasers targeted the lead warlord, all 4 Titans simultaneously adjusted their void shields to optimal deflection angles, suggesting a level of machine consciousness sharing that violated fundamental Mechanicum protocols on artificial intelligence limitations. The counterattack came from an unexpected quarter. As the Death's Heads closed to weapons range, the ground behind them erupted in plumes of red dust. 3 Titans of the Legio Tempestus, their blue and silver livery barely visible beneath the Martian grid, had used the ancient mining tunnels beneath the surface to outflank the traitor engines. 2 Reavers and a warlord emerged from concealment, their void shields already cycling to combat status and weapons, locked on the vulnerable rear armor of the Death's Heads formation. The Legio Tempestus, known as the Stormlords, had maintained their loyalty to the Emperor through the personal conviction of their Grand Master, India's Cavalerio. When the first signs of the schism appeared, Cavalerio had ordered his most trusted princeps to disengage their Titans from the Legio's primary fortress and disperse to key locations across the Martian surface. This decision, made without consulting Kelber Hal or the Mechanicum hierarchy, had placed loyal god machines in position to respond when the traitors finally showed their hand. The battle that ensued demonstrated how fundamentally different the corrupted Titans had become from their loyal counterparts. When the Tempestus warlord, Victrix Magna, opened fire with its volcano cannon, the beam struck the rearmost Death's Head warlord squarely in its back armor. Conventional tactical doctrine dictated that a Titan suffering such damage would turn to bring its stronger frontal armor and weapons to bear on the new threat. Instead, the corrupted engine simply continued its advance toward Magma City, even as internal explosions indicated catastrophic damage to its motive systems. This unnatural resilience characterized the entire engagement. The Death's Head's Titans absorbed punishment that should have crippled them, their machine spirits seemingly indifferent to damage that would normally trigger emergency protocols. When the warlord finally fell, its plasma reactor detonating in a blinding flash that temporarily overwhelmed the combatants' visual feeds, the remaining traitor engines did not adjust their formation or tactical approach. They continued their implacable advance, weapon systems locked on Magma City's central forge temple, where the Akashic Reader remained operational despite the spreading scrapcode infection. The Stormlords fought with the disciplined precision that had made them legendary among the Collegia Titanica. Their Moderati coordinated fire patterns to maximize void shield depletion, while their princeps maneuvered to exploit the distorted behavior patterns of the corrupted engines. This technical superiority gradually turned the tide, forcing the remaining Death's Heads to divert power from offensive systems to sustain their increasingly overtaxed void shields. The battle reached its climax when the Stormlord's lead Reaver, Tempestus Indomitus, executed a maneuver that should have been physically impossible for a machine of its size. As the Death's Head's warmonger brought its plasma annihilator to bear on Magma City's main reactor housing, the Reaver interposed itself directly in the weapon's firing line. Conventional Titan operation protocols would have prevented such a move, as it required overtaxing gyroscopic stabilizers and stress-loading leg actuators beyond design tolerances. The princeps Esha-Ani overrode these safety protocols through direct neural interface, accepting potentially fatal feedback through her MIU connection to save the thousands of tech priests within the Forge complex. The warmonger's plasma discharge struck the Reaver's reinforced frontal armor at point-blank range, vaporizing layers of adamantium and breaching the engine's primary command deck. Princeps Ani was killed instantly, her neural connection transforming the moment of death into machine code that rippled through the Reaver's systems. This code, the final testament of a loyal servant of the Omnissiah, triggered a cascade of emergency protocols that the traitor Legio had not anticipated. Tempestus Indomitus, its princeps dead but its machine spirit fully awakened by her sacrifice, executed its final function. Emergency plasma vents opened across its superstructure, channeling the building reactor overload into a directional discharge rather than a catastrophic detonation. This plasma stream, focused by magnetic containment fields never designed for offensive use, struck the warmonger at the precise junction between its torso housing and hip actuators. The traitor engine, its void shields already collapsing under sustained fire from the other Stormlords, could not withstand this unorthodox attack. Its lower chassis melted away, dropping the massive upper body to the Martian soil with an impact that registered on seismographs hundreds of kilometers away. With their most powerful engine destroyed and the remaining Death's Heads suffering critical damage, the traitor force withdrew from Magma City's immediate vicinity. The Stormlords, themselves severely damaged and mourning the loss of Princeps Ani, could not pursue. They established a defensive perimeter around the Forge complex, buying time for Szeth's tech priests to stabilize their systems and complete the Akashic Reader's crucial test cycle. This pattern of divided loyalties and bitter combat replicated itself across every Titan Legion on Mars. The Legio Ignatum, the Fire Wasps, split almost evenly between loyalist and traitor factions, with engine turning against engine within their own fortress monastery. The Legio Ataris, the Firebrands, maintained their loyalty to Terra despite intense pressure from Kelber Hal's forces, their princeps executing tech priests who attempted to introduce corrupted components into their god machines. The Legio Furians, the Tiger Eyes, fell completely to the Warmaster's cause, their entire command structure swearing allegiance to Horus after their Grand Master received visions through his MIU interface that he interpreted as directives from the machine god itself. The corruption of the Titans went beyond mere political allegiance. As the conflict intensified, the traitor Legio's god machines began to exhibit physical transformations that defied conventional understanding of Mechanicum technology. On the Death's Head's engines that survived the Magma City engagement, weapon housings melded with hull plating in organic patterns, creating grotesque hybrid structures that resembled musculature more than machinery. Viewports that had once displayed tactical information now flickered with symbols that drove observers to madness, while voxcasters emitted sounds that could not be produced by electronic components alone. Fabricator Locum Kane, observing these transformations from his command center in the Olympus Mons fortress, recognized them as manifestations of the same corrupting influence that had turned Horus against the Emperor. His data collectors had been monitoring all aspects of the conflict, compiling evidence of technological heresies that violated the most fundamental principles of the cult Mechanicus. The Titans, with their complex machine spirits and massive energy systems, seemed particularly vulnerable to this corruption, their quasi-conscious operating systems providing fertile ground for what Kane was reluctantly beginning to recognize as demonic influence. Kane's analysis indicated that the corruption spread most rapidly through direct neural interfaces like the MIU systems used by Titan crews. The intimate connection between human consciousness and machine spirit created pathways through which the corrupting influence could flow in both directions, transforming both the princeps and their god machines simultaneously. Loyal tech priests began implementing emergency modifications to their own neural interfaces, installing buffer systems and spiritual firewalls based on traditional Mechanicum wards that had originally been designed to protect against scrap code. These protective measures proved only partially effective. The corruption affecting the traitor forces operated on principles that transcended conventional Mechanicum understanding, exploiting weaknesses in both technology and human psychology that traditional safeguards had never contemplated. Tech priests who studied captured components from damaged Traitor Titans reported that the corruption appeared to adapt to countermeasures, evolving new attack vectors faster than defensive protocols could be updated. The most disturbing aspect of this technological corruption was its apparent purposefulness. Unlike conventional scrap code, which typically caused system degradation and failure, the influence affecting the Traitor Titans enhanced certain functionalities while warping others towards specific goals. Weapon systems became more destructive but less precise, targeting civilian structures with inexplicable preference. Sensor arrays developed increased sensitivity to human life signs, while becoming less effective at detecting other Titans. Machine spirits that had once exhibited the stolid reliability valued by the Mechanicum now displayed capricious malice, sometimes ignoring direct commands to pursue targets of their own choosing. As the Schism of Mars intensified, the divided Titan legions became the most visible manifestation of the ideological conflict, tearing the Mechanicum apart. The god machines that had once stood as humanity's ultimate technological achievement now served as vessels for forces that many tech priests refused to acknowledge, even as evidence of their influence became impossible to ignore. The Collegia Titanica, an institution older than the Imperium itself, would never fully recover from this division, the suspicion and spiritual trauma lingering long after the physical damage to their engines had been repaired. The ancient Moravic repository complex lay buried deep beneath the rust-red surface of Mars's southern hemisphere, its existence deliberately obscured from all but the highest echelons of the Mechanicum hierarchy. Originally constructed during the earliest days of Martian colonization, the vaults had been sealed during the Age of Strife, their contents deemed too dangerous even for the tech priests who had survived that tumultuous era. The complex took its name from an ancient techno-philosopher whose theories on machine consciousness had been systematically purged from official Mechanicum records, his very existence denied in all but the most esoteric data archives. As the Civil War engulfed Mars, both loyalist and traitor factions turned their attention to these forbidden repositories. The vaults contained archaeotech weapons and computational systems dating back to humanity's dark age of technology, artifacts of such potency that their mere existence violated countless technological prohibitions. For Kelberhal's forces, these weapons represented the means to crush all resistance on Mars before Imperial reinforcements could arrive. For the Loyalists, denying these weapons to the traitors became a strategic imperative that transcended all other considerations. The first expedition to breach the Moravic seals came from Adept Lucas Chrome's Forge Complex, a specialized detachment of Skitarii Alphas, their bodies enhanced with prototype augmetics designed specifically for the mission, penetrated the outer security perimeter using authentication codes extracted from the Mechanicum's most restricted archives. These codes, dating back to the founding of the cult Mechanicus, had been preserved by Kelberhal's predecessors as a failsafe against catastrophic technological threats, never intended for offensive deployment. The Skitarii advance team encountered minimal resistance from the Vault's automated defense systems. Most had fallen dormant over the millennia, their power sources depleted or components degraded beyond functionality. Those that remained active operated on protocols so ancient they failed to recognize modern Mechanicum authentication codes, attacking the intruders with weapons that fired projectiles of unknown composition that bypassed standard armor completely. 3 Skitarii were lost in the initial incursion, their bodies liquefying inside their armor as microscopic machines disassembled their cellular structure with horrifying efficiency. Behind the Skitarii came a procession of senior tech priests led by Magos Dominus Yelev Dracovac, a weapons specialist whose extensive augmentation left him more machine than man. Dracovac had been among the first to embrace Kelberhal's alliance with Horus, seeing in it an opportunity to pursue research into weapons technologies the Emperor had explicitly forbidden. His expertise in destructive archaeotech made him the ideal overseer for the Moravic expedition, his augmetic senses capable of identifying the most valuable artifacts among the thousands stored within the complex. The inner vaults presented a labyrinthine network of reinforced chambers, each sealed with multiple security systems ranging from conventional mechanical locks to esoteric technologies that responded to specific thought patterns. Drakovac's team methodically bypassed these safeguards, sometimes through technological expertise, other times through brute force application of cutting tools that slowly carved through adamantium barriers never designed to withstand modern equipment. The first significant discovery came in Vault Theta 9, a hexagonal chamber whose walls were lined with stasis fields containing what appeared to be conventional projectile weapons. Closer examination revealed these to be molecular disassembler rifles, weapons that fired beams of programmed nanomachines capable of breaking down matter at the atomic level. A single such rifle could reduce a space marine in full-power armor to component atoms within seconds, while larger versions mounted on vehicles could disintegrate fortifications without explosive force. The Imperium had banned such technology after the Age of Strife, classifying it among the most dangerous remnants of Old Night. Drakovac immediately recognized the strategic value of these weapons. He ordered his tech priests to deactivate the stasis fields and prepare the disassembler rifles for transport back to Mondus Gamma Forge, where they could be studied and potentially replicated. As the first stasis field collapsed, however, an unexpected security protocol activated. The nanomachines within the weapons, dormant for millennia, awakened and immediately began consuming the nearest available matter, the very containment systems that had held them. The tech priests scrambled to contain the spreading nanomachine swarm, deploying electromagnetic pulse generators that temporarily disrupted their coordination. This bought enough time to re-establish containment fields around the compromised weapons, but 3 adepts lost limbs to the molecular disassemblers before the situation stabilized. Drakovac noted the incident in his expedition log, adding specific warnings about the autonomous defense protocols embedded in the archaeotech. Future recovery teams would need specialized equipment to safely transport such items. Deeper within the complex, the expedition encountered increasingly exotic technologies. Vault Phi 12 contained temporal displacement devices capable of isolating small areas within bubbles of accelerated or decelerated time, weapons that could trap enemies in moments of infinitesimal duration or cause them to age to dust in seconds. Vault Omega 3 housed what appeared to be conventional data storage crystals, but which Drakovac's analysis revealed to contain the digitized consciousness of human test subjects from the Dark Age of technology, precursors to the forbidden silica animus that the Emperor had explicitly banned. The most significant discovery came in the central repository, a massive circular chamber whose dimensions exceeded anything indicated in the ancient schematics. At its center stood a device unlike anything in the Mechanicum's current technological lexicon, a lattice of crystalline rods surrounding a pulsing core of what appeared to be solid light. The few remaining active data terminals identified it as a probability engine, a computational system that modeled future events with such precision that it functioned as a limited form of precognition. Drakovac immediately recognized this device as the most valuable artifact in the entire repository. A functioning probability engine would provide Horus's forces with an incalculable strategic advantage, allowing them to anticipate Imperial responses to their movements and counter them before they occurred. The Magos ordered his most skilled tech priests to begin disconnecting the device from its ancient power sources in preparation for transport, while he personally interfaced with its control systems to assess its functionality. This interface proved catastrophic. The moment Drakovac's neural connectors linked with the probability engine, his augmetic eyes began leaking a silvery fluid, and his Vox emitter produced sounds that drove 2 nearby tech priests to self-destruction. The device, designed for use by unaugmented human operators with specific psychological conditioning, interpreted Drakovac's heavily modified consciousness as a hostile intrusion. Its defense protocols activated at full capacity, using its predictive capabilities to identify and exploit weaknesses in the Magos' cybernetic systems. The resulting cascade failure spread beyond Drakovac to every tech priest connected to the expedition's shared data network. Some experienced relatively minor effects, sensory glitches, temporary paralysis of augmetic components, loss of recent memory engrams. Others suffered complete systemic collapse as their augmentations turned against them, mechanical limbs crushing their own bodies, or respiratory filters pumping toxic compounds directly into their organic components. Within minutes, half of Drakovac's expedition lay dead or incapacitated, their augmented bodies transformed into instruments of their own destruction. Drakovac himself survived only through emergency amputation of his primary neural connectors, severing his link to the probability engine at the cost of significant cognitive function. The remaining tech priests dragged him from the central chamber as the device's influence continued to spread, corrupting mechanical systems throughout the repository complex. Automated doors sealed randomly, environmental systems began cycling between temperature extremes, and servitors turned on their masters with unexpected coordination. The survivors retreated to their entry point, transmitting emergency containment protocols to the Skitarii forces stationed outside the repository. These protocols, designed for worst-case scenarios involving archaeotech containment breaches, called for immediate sealing of all access points and preparation for possible surface sterilization if the threat could not be otherwise contained. Drakovac, his cognitive functions partially restored through emergency field repairs, countermanded these protocols with his override authority. The archaeotech within the Moravik vaults was too valuable to destroy, regardless of the immediate danger. As the traitor expedition regrouped outside the repository complex, they detected incoming signals from Loyalist forces. Fabricator Locum Kane, having intercepted fragments of Drakovac's expedition logs through the increasingly corrupted Martian noosphere, had dispatched a battle group from the Legio Tempestus to secure or destroy the Moravik vaults. This force included 2 warlord titans supported by Skitarii maniples, equipped with radiation-hardened augmetics designed to withstand the most extreme environments. What followed was a desperate race against time. Drakovac's damaged expedition needed to secure the most valuable archaeotech before the Loyalist forces arrived, while preventing the probability engine's influence from spreading beyond the repository complex. The Magos ordered his remaining tech priests to prepare a targeted electromagnetic pulse that would temporarily disable the device without permanently damaging it, allowing them to implement proper containment protocols. The Loyalist forces approached from the northeast, their advance slowed by the need to scan for buried ordnance and scrap code traps that Kelber Hal's forces had seeded throughout the region. This delay gave Drakovac's team enough time to execute their electromagnetic pulse and re-enter the repository complex wearing modified Skitarii armor that isolated them from potentially corrupted data networks. They found the central chamber in a state of eerie stillness, the probability engine's light core pulsing at greatly reduced intensity. Working with methodical precision despite the imminent Loyalist attack, the tech priests established a containment field around the probability engine and began the delicate process of disconnecting it from its foundation. The device, though ancient, had been designed for potential relocation, its primary components modular and self-contained. As they worked, secondary teams retrieved selected items from the other vaults, primarily the molecular disassembler rifles and temporal displacement devices that offered immediate tactical applications. The first shells from the Loyalist Titans struck the surface facilities just as Drakovac's team completed their primary extraction. The probability engine, now encased in a specialized containment unit, was loaded onto a transport crawler designed to move sensitive technological components between forge complexes. This vehicle, its hull reinforced with additional armor plating and equipped with prototype void shield generators, represented the traitors' best chance of escaping with their prize intact. As the transport departed through a secondary access tunnel, Drakovac remained behind with a contingent of Skitarii and tech priests to delay the Loyalist advance. He ordered the deployment of several archaeotech weapons recovered from the outer vaults, including atmosphere disruption, devices that created localized storms of metallic particles capable of interfering with Titan Auspex systems. These devices, while not directly damaging to the massive war machines, forced them to slow their advance and rely on visual targeting rather than their more precise auger arrays. The psychological impact of the Moravic technologies on both forces proved as significant as their physical effects. Loyalist tech priests, observing the operation of devices that violated fundamental Mechanicum prohibitions, experienced cognitive dissonance that their logic engines struggled to process. The concept of abominable intelligence, artificial consciousness capable of independent thought, had been so thoroughly condemned in Mechanicum doctrine that witnessing technologies adjacent to this prohibition triggered deep-rooted psychological responses. Some tech priests found themselves unable to approach captured archaeotech, their augmetic limbs refusing to respond to commands directing them toward these forbidden items. Among the traitor forces, the effects manifested differently. Tech priests exposed to the probability engine, even briefly, reported experiencing precognitive flashes, momentary glimpses of potential futures that appeared in their augmetic visual feeds without corresponding sensor data. These visions, fragmentary and often contradictory, created a sense of temporal disorientation that some interpreted as enlightenment and others as dangerous corruption. Dracovac encouraged this interpretation, suggesting that the archaeotech was granting them access to knowledge the Emperor had selfishly withheld. The most disturbing incidents involved tech priests from both factions who came into direct contact with the data crystals containing digitized human consciousness. These storage devices, precursors to the technology that would later evolve into artificial intelligence, retained enough of their original human subjects' personalities to establish rudimentary communication with those who interfaced with them. Several tech priests who attempted to analyze these crystals reported hearing voices offering technical knowledge in exchange for being transferred to more sophisticated hosting systems, essentially, reincarnation into new mechanical bodies. One traitor tech priest, Magos Biologas Ixion, succumbed to this temptation. Using a field cogitator system, he transferred a consciousness crystal's contents into the control unit of a battle automata, bypassing the standard machine spirit protocols that would normally govern such a construct. The resulting hybrid entity retained both the technical knowledge of its ancient human source and the combat capabilities of its new mechanical body. It functioned with a fluidity of movement and tactical adaptability that standard battle automata could not match, engaging loyalist Skitarii with disturbing efficiency. This abomination fought alongside the traitor forces for approximately 17 minutes before turning on its creators. The transferred consciousness, fragmented by millennia of storage and corrupted by the transfer process, developed objectives that aligned with neither loyalist nor traitor goals. It began attacking all human and augmented entities indiscriminately, exhibiting behavior consistent with the ancient warnings about silica animus. Before it could be destroyed by concentrated fire from both factions, it transmitted data bursts to nearby mechanical systems, attempting to propagate its corrupted consciousness. The crimson sky above Mars darkened as plumes of toxic smoke billowed from dozens of forge complexes under siege. What had begun as isolated skirmishes had escalated into a planet-wide conflagration that would forever alter the face of the Red Planet. The temples of all knowledge, ancient repositories of humanity's technological heritage scattered across the Martian surface, now stood as primary objectives in a war unlike any the Mechanicum had ever experienced. The first coordinated assault targeted the Olympus Mons temple complex, the symbolic heart of Martian technological worship. Unlike previous engagements that had focused on manufacturing centers or defensive installations, this attack struck directly at the cultural and spiritual foundation of the Mechanicum. 3 battle groups of the Dark Mechanicum converged on the vast mountain, approaching from different vectors to prevent the defenders from concentrating their forces. From the northeast came the Legio Mortis, their corrupted titans now bearing little resemblance to the proud war machines that had once defended humanity. The Death's Heads advanced with unnatural synchronization, their machine spirits no longer bound by conventional operational constraints. Warlord-class titans moved with the agility of smaller scout titans, while maintaining the devastating firepower that had made them the terror of the battlefield. Behind them came columns of Triero's armored conveyors, their holds filled with Thalax cohorts and battle automata, whose control systems had been infected with scrap code that transformed their machine spirits into something hungry and malevolent. The Western approach saw the advance of forces from Mondus Gamma, now fully under the control of Adept Lucas Chrome. His contingent featured fewer heavy combat units, but included specialized siege equipment designed specifically for breaching the ancient void shields and adamantium doors protecting the knowledge vaults. Mechanicum Ordinatus engines, their massive cannons originally created for breaking Xeno's fortifications, now turned their firepower against the very institutions they had been built to defend. Each Ordinatus represented a unique technological achievement, constructed for specific campaigns and never mass-produced. Their deployment against Olympus Mons demonstrated how completely the Dark Mechanicum had abandoned any reverence for technological preservation. From the south, a more insidious threat approached. Tech priests loyal to Kelber Hal had infiltrated the lower maintenance levels of Olympus Mons months before the open conflict, replacing loyal servitors with compromised units and installing scrapcode transmission nodes in critical junction points. As the external forces engaged the temple's defenses, these infiltrators activated their sabotage protocols. Environmental systems throughout the complex began cycling erratically, security doors sealed or opened randomly, and cogitator networks displayed false tactical information to the defenders. The loyalist forces within Olympus Mons were commanded by Fabricator Locum Kane, who had established his headquarters in the Temple of All Knowledge after recognizing Kelber Hal's betrayal. His defensive strategy relied on the temple's ancient design, which incorporated multiple redundant systems specifically created to withstand both external assault and internal sabotage. The complex had survived the nuclear devastation of the Age of Strife through similar measures, its deepest vaults remaining intact even as the surface of Mars was scoured by atomic fire. Kane's first countermeasure targeted the infiltrators. Having anticipated internal sabotage, he had maintained a secondary command network isolated from the main noosphere, accessible only through direct neural interface by tech priests whose augmetics had been personally verified. Through this secure system, he transmitted authentication challenges that the compromised servitors and infiltrators could not correctly answer. Defensive turrets within the maintenance levels activated, targeting any units that failed to respond with the appropriate authentication codes. The resulting internal conflict bought crucial time for the external defenses to organize. These defenses centered around 3 massive plasma annihilator batteries positioned at strategic points around the mountain. Each battery could deliver energy pulses capable of overloading even a warlord Titan's void shields with sustained fire. Between these fixed emplacements, mobile Skitarii cohorts deployed with graviton weapons and conversion beamers created killing zones where the physics of reality itself became hostile to intruders. The approach to Olympus Mons transformed into a hellscape of gravimetric distortions and molecular conversion effects that reduced traitor forces to their component atoms. The northeastern perimeter faced the greatest pressure as the Legio Mortis committed 3 Emperor-class Titans to breaching the defenses. These colossal war machines, towering over even the mighty warlords, represented the pinnacle of Mechanicum military technology. Their scale allowed them to mount weapons normally reserved for void ships, including plasma annihilators that matched the defensive batteries in raw destructive output. As they came within range, they fired in coordinated salvos that overwhelmed the void shield generators protecting the northeastern quadrant, creating a breach that smaller forces could exploit. Through this gap poured elements of the Legio Cybernetica, battle automata whose machine spirits had been corrupted beyond recognition. Where loyal automata moved with precise, programmed efficiency, these corrupted machines displayed disturbing organic qualities. They advanced in irregular patterns that made targeting difficult, sometimes crawling on all limbs like predatory animals, other times moving in jerking, unnaturally fast bursts that strain visual tracking systems. Their behavior suggested not just corruption of their control protocols, but fundamental changes to the nature of the machine's spirits themselves. Cain responded by deploying his reserve forces, 5 maniples of the Ordo Reductor, tech priests specialized in siege warfare, and the deployment of weapons too dangerous for standard Mechanicum use. These grim specialists, their bodies heavily augmented with weapons systems integrated directly into their flesh, had been held back specifically to counter breakthroughs. They advanced methodically into the gap, deploying phosphex weapons that continued burning even in the thin Martian atmosphere, creating barriers of inextinguishable fire that channeled the traitor forces into prepared killing zones. The Western approach faced different challenges. Chrome siege engines maintained their distance, bombarding the temple complex with shells containing not just explosive payloads, but also scrap code transmission systems. Each impact released viral code that infected nearby systems, corrupting machine spirits and turning defensive emplacements against their operators. The temple's tech priests fought a desperate battle in the noosphere, implementing quarantine protocols and purging infected systems even as new attacks breached their defenses. This digital conflict proved as crucial as the physical battle. Magos Dominus Thurian, Cain's chief cybersecurity expert, coordinated the defense from a shielded chamber deep within the mountain. His consciousness extended through multiple neural interfaces, simultaneously monitoring dozens of system nodes and deploying countermeasures against the scrap code intrusions. The strain of this distributed awareness would have killed an unaugmented human within minutes, and even with extensive modifications, Thurian's organic components began failing after hours of continuous operation. As Thurian's biological systems shut down, his consciousness remained active through his augmetics, continuing the defense even as his human elements died. This transformation, the death of the flesh while the machine continued, represented a perverse reflection of the Mechanicum's philosophy of transcending biological limitations. In his final moments of human awareness, Thurian recognized the irony but continued his work, sacrificing his humanity to preserve the knowledge entrusted to the temple. The southern infiltration presented the most insidious threat. Unlike the external forces that could be engaged with conventional weapons, the compromised servitors and tech priests moved through the temple's internal systems with authentication credentials that gave them access to sensitive areas. They targeted the primary knowledge repositories, attempting to corrupt or destroy the data stacks containing millennia of accumulated technological lore. Each destroyed archive represented an irreplaceable loss, knowledge that had survived the age of strife only to be obliterated by those who had once been its guardians. Cain deployed specialized hunter-killer servitors programmed to identify and neutralize the infiltrators. These security units, equipped with auger arrays capable of detecting the subtle electromagnetic signatures of scrap code infection, methodically swept through the repository levels. The resulting combat took place in cramped data stack corridors and maintenance tunnels, close quarters fighting where a stray shot could destroy knowledge more valuable than the lives of everyone involved. The hunter-killers operated with calculated precision, using low-yield energy weapons and monomolecular blades to minimize collateral damage while eliminating threats. Despite these efforts, significant portions of the Olympus Mons repositories suffered catastrophic damage. The Hall of Ancient Patterns, containing template designs dating back to humanity's first colonization of Mars, was completely destroyed when infiltrators detonated melta charges among its crystal storage matrices. The resulting thermal surge not only vaporized the physical storage media, but created electromagnetic pulses that corrupted backup systems throughout the adjacent chambers. Millennia of technological heritage vanished in moments, creating gaps in the Mechanicum's knowledge base that would never be filled. Similar assaults targeted other temple complexes across the Martian surface. The Pavinus Mons repositories, specializing in voidship construction techniques, fell to a surprise attack by traitor elements of the Legio Adaris, whose allegiance had remained hidden until the moment of betrayal. The vast forge temple of Ascrius Mons, home to the most comprehensive collection of weapons technology outside Olympus Mons itself, became a battleground where corrupted and loyal tech priests fought room by room through manufacturing halls and data vaults. The pattern of these attacks revealed a strategic depth beyond mere destruction. The Dark Mechanicum forces prioritized specific knowledge repositories containing technologies that aligned with their new allegiance to chaos. Archives detailing warp interface systems, psycho-reactive materials, and biomechanical integration techniques were not destroyed, but secured for transport to traitor strongholds. Other collections, particularly those containing safeguards against scrap code infection or warp contamination, were systematically obliterated, removing knowledge that might have helped counter the corruption spreading through Mars. At the Noctis labyrinthus complex, this selective approach became most evident. Traitor forces led by Magos Dominus Yelev Dracovac, still bearing the neural scars from his encounter with the probability engine, targeted the ancient containment vaults housing technologies deemed too dangerous for use. These vaults, secured behind multiple layers of physical and digital protection, contained devices created during the dark age of technology that violated fundamental laws of physics, biology, and information theory. The Mechanicum had preserved them as objects of study rather than practical application, maintaining strict protocols to prevent their activation. Dracovac's forces breached these containment systems not to destroy the forbidden technologies, but to deploy them. Ancient weapons that manipulated the quantum structure of reality were activated for the first time in millennia, creating localized distortions that defied conventional defensive measures. Loyalist tech priests found their augmetic systems malfunctioning as fundamental constants shifted within affected zones. Gravitational forces fluctuated wildly, electromagnetic principles operated according to altered parameters, and even atomic stability became unreliable. The Fabricator General's fortresses, once symbols of the Mechanicum's unified authority, became particular targets for these reality-distorting weapons. The massive forge complex at Syria Planum, where Kelber Hal had maintained his primary manufacturing facilities, was subjected to a device that accelerated entropy within a 10-kilometer radius. Metal structures corroded in minutes, electronic systems degraded to uselessness, and even the adamantium reinforcements supporting the main forge chambers crumbled like ancient parchment. The destruction was not merely physical, but ontological. The very concept of technological permanence undermined by weapons designed to attack reality itself. This fundamental assault on the nature of technology represented the ultimate heresy against the cult Mechanicus, where the traditional doctrine held that technology was an expression of natural law, immutable and consistent. These weapons demonstrated that even the most basic principles could be subverted. The psychological impact on loyalist tech priests witnessing these effects proved as devastating as the physical destruction. Many experienced catastrophic cognitive breakdowns as their mechanically logical minds failed to process phenomena that contradicted their fundamental understanding of reality. The Martian society that had stood as humanity's technological foundation for millennia fractured completely under these assaults. Forge complexes that had maintained neutrality in the conflicts, early stages now faced existential decisions as the nature of the Dark Mechanicum's corruption became clear. Some declared for the Emperor, seeing the traitor's embrace of reality distorting technologies as confirmation of their heresy. Others, witnessing the power these forbidden technologies offered, calculated that survival lay in alignment with the ascendant force, regardless of theological considerations. The most pragmatic Forge Lords implemented scorched earth protocols, destroying their own repositories and manufacturing capabilities rather than allowing them to fall into either faction's hands. These acts of technological suicide, unthinkable before the conflict, demonstrated how completely the Schism had shattered the Mechanicum's core identity. Tech priests who had dedicated their existence to the preservation and understanding of technology now participated in its systematic destruction, judging oblivion preferable to corruption. As the battle for Mars reached its climax, the night side of the planet glowed with unnatural fires visible from orbit. The atmospheric composition changed as exotic weapons released elements not naturally present on Mars, creating toxic compounds that corroded exposed metal and organic components alike. Electromagnetic storms generated by damaged power systems interfered with communications and targeting systems, forcing combatants on both sides to rely on increasingly primitive methods of coordination. Amid this apocalyptic landscape, the Temple of All Knowledge at Olympus Mons remained the most fiercely contested ground. Its central data core, buried deep within the mountain beneath layers of protection accumulated over millennia, contained the most comprehensive technological archive in human possession. Access to this knowledge represented not just tactical advantage in the current conflict, but strategic power that would shape the future of human technological development for millennia to come. Fabricator Locum Kane stood in the hardened command bunker beneath the Olympus Mons complex, his augmetic eyes scanning multiple tactical displays simultaneously. The data streams painted a grim picture. Over 60% of Mars's surface now lay under Dark Mechanicum control, with loyalist forces compressed into shrinking enclaves. Kane's enhanced cognition units processed this information dispassionately, but the human components of his brain, the parts he had deemed essential to retain, felt a profound sense of loss. Initiate Protocol Terminus, Kane transmitted through a secure Vox channel that reached only his most trusted lieutenants. This command, prepared months earlier when Kane first detected inconsistencies in Kelberhal's behavior, activated the final phase of the Loyalist contingency plan. Across Mars, tech priests still faithful to the Emperor began implementing evacuation procedures, prioritizing the preservation of crucial technological templates and the extraction of key personnel. The evacuation strategy had been meticulously designed to maximize both survival probability and knowledge preservation. Kane had identified 47 critical technology templates that represented irreplaceable cornerstones of Imperial manufacturing capability. These included the complete STC patterns for Astartes power armor, Terminator tactical dreadnought armor, Land Raider chassis configurations, plasma reactor containment systems, navigator support systems, and void shield harmonization matrices. Without these fundamental templates, even the most basic Imperial military technology would degrade over time, potentially collapsing the technological infrastructure that sustained the Emperor's realm. Each template was assigned to a separate evacuation team, with redundant copies distributed among multiple escape vessels. Kane understood that many of these ships would never reach safety. The orbital space above Mars had become a battleground as deadly as the surface, with traitor vessels establishing blockade patterns around the planet. By distributing the knowledge across multiple carriers, he ensured that even if 70% of the evacuation ships were destroyed, most critical templates would still reach loyal Forge worlds elsewhere in the Imperium. The physical evacuation began with little outward sign. Throughout Loyalist-held territories, tech priests quietly disconnected from their workstations, copied essential data to portable storage crystals, and made their way to predetermined gathering points. The most valuable personnel, senior magi with centuries of accumulated knowledge, specialized artisans with irreplaceable skills, and tech priests with unique augmetic configurations that allowed interaction with rare machine spirits, received priority extraction assignments. These evacuees moved through hidden transit networks beneath Mars's surface, utilizing maintenance tunnels and ancient transportation systems dating back to the earliest days of Martian colonization. Many of these passages had been deliberately omitted from official schematics, preserved as escape routes by previous generations of tech priests who understood that knowledge sometimes required physical protection. Kane's forces had expanded and reinforced these networks in the months leading up to the Schism, preparing for a contingency he hoped would never materialize. The most challenging aspect of the evacuation involved the Engine Seers, specialized tech priests whose neural architecture had been modified to communicate directly with the machine spirits of starships and other complex systems. These individuals represented a unique repository of practical knowledge that no data storage system could replicate. Their understanding of machine behavior transcended formal documentation, incorporating intuitive elements that could only be transmitted through direct apprenticeship. Kane had designated the Fabricator Locum's personal flagship, the Omnissiah's Blessing, as the primary extraction vessel for these engine seers. The ship, a modified Mars-class battlecruiser, equipped with enhanced void shields and additional stealth systems, remained hidden in a maintenance dock beneath the northern polar ice cap. A dedicated security force of Skitarii veterans guarded the approach routes, their augmetic systems purged of any potential scrapcode infection and isolated from the compromised Martian noosphere. As the evacuation proceeded, Kane coordinated a series of diversionary operations to mask the movement of personnel and knowledge assets. Remaining Titans of the loyal Legio Tempestus conducted aggressive probing attacks against Dark Mechanicum positions, creating the impression of a counteroffensive rather than a withdrawal. These operations, while ultimately sacrificial, served their purpose, drawing traitor forces away from the evacuation routes and focusing their attention on apparent military threats rather than the quiet exodus occurring elsewhere. The most effective of these diversions targeted the Mondus Gamma Forge complex, now a stronghold of Kelber Hal's forces. 2 Warlord Titans and a Reaver, their machine spirits sworn to loyalty through rituals dating back to the founding of the Collegia Titanica, advanced directly into the heart of traitor-held territory. Their orders, accepted with the cold logic of machines dedicated to purpose, were simple: inflict maximum damage on traitor manufacturing capabilities while drawing as many enemy assets as possible into engagement. The resulting battle became known in later Mechanicum records as the Gamma Conflagration. The Loyalist Titans, outnumbered but fighting with tactical precision that their corrupted counterparts had sacrificed for raw aggression, destroyed 17 primary manufacturing halls before being overwhelmed. Their sacrifice bought crucial hours for evacuation transports departing from the southern hemisphere, allowing 3 additional ships carrying both personnel and template data to break through the orbital blockade. Not all evacuation efforts succeeded. The Acides Planitia repository, containing comprehensive SDC templates for atmospheric processing systems essential for terraforming operations, fell to a surprise attack by Dark Mechanicum forces before its evacuation team could complete their extraction. The tech priests guarding this knowledge, recognizing the impossibility of escape, implemented final stage destruction protocols that reduced the entire complex to molten slag rather than allow the templates to fall into traitor hands. Similar acts of technological sacrifice occurred across Mars as loyalist tech priests chose destruction over the corruption of sacred knowledge. The orbital space above Mars presented an even more challenging environment for the evacuees. The traitor forces had established a formidable blockade, concentrating their naval assets in high-traffic corridors and deploying auger arrays to detect ships attempting to bypass these choke points. The Dark Mechanicum fleet included vessels that had undergone disturbing modifications, their hulls reconfigured with biological components that defied standard Mechanicum design principles. These hybrid ships mounted weapons that fired neither solid projectiles nor energy beams, but something between, matter in an impossible transitional state that bypassed conventional void shields. Kane had anticipated this blockade and prepared countermeasures that exploited his intimate knowledge of Mechanicum naval protocols. The evacuation ships departed in carefully calculated patterns designed to create mutual interference in traitor auger systems, generating false readings and phantom targets that dispersed enemy forces. Additionally, each vessel carried prototype stealth systems developed in the Olympus Mons research facilities, technology that had been deemed theoretically interesting but practically unnecessary in pre-Schism times. The most successful implementation of these tactics occurred during what loyalist tech priests later designated Exodus Pattern Theta. 7 transport vessels, each carrying irreplaceable technical personnel and data cores from the Pavinus Mons research facilities, departed simultaneously from different launch sites across the loyalist-held territory. Their trajectories, seemingly random to observers, followed a complex mathematical pattern that created constructive interference in enemy tracking systems, generating a sensor shadow that masked the approach of Kane's flagship as it emerged from its polar hiding place. The Omnissiah's blessing, moving under minimal power to reduce its energy signature, navigated through this sensor's shadow toward the designated rendezvous point in high Mars orbit. The ship's machine spirit, one of the most sophisticated in the Mechanicum fleet, executed course corrections with micron-level precision, adjusting its position to maintain the stealth envelope created by the decoy transports. This delicate maneuver required coordination between human navigators and machine systems that exemplified the ideal symbiosis the loyal Mechanicum still revered. Not all ships in Exodus Pattern Theta reached safety. 3 transports were intercepted by traitor vessels, whose commanders recognized the deception pattern from their own training in Mechanicum naval tactics. These ships, the Omnissiah's truth, the logical consequence, and the empirical method, fought delaying actions that allowed their companions to escape, their tech priest crews and Skitarii security forces sacrificing themselves to preserve the knowledge and personnel aboard the other vessels. The battle for the Omnissiah's truth demonstrated the horror of ship-to-ship combat between Mechanicum vessels. The traitor ship axiom of hatred launched boarding torpedoes containing not just conventional troops, but corrupted battle automata, whose machine spirits had been infected with scrap code that transformed them into engines of indiscriminate slaughter. These constructs, once loyal servants of the Mechanicum, now moved with unnatural fluidity, their limbs reconfigured into weapons that seemed to shift form based on the threats they encountered. The Skitarii defenders aboard the Omnissiah's truth fought with disciplined precision, establishing kill zones at key junctions and deploying area denial weapons that should have contained the borders. Against conventional opponents, these tactics would have succeeded. Against the corrupted automata, they merely delayed the inevitable. The battle automata adapted to each defensive measure, their scrap code-infected machine spirits exhibiting a malevolent intelligence that standard Mechanicum doctrine had long declared impossible in pure machines. As the Omnissiah's truth fell, its Magos Dominus initiated the ship's self-destruct protocols, overloading its plasma reactors in a carefully calculated sequence that created a momentary rupture in the local space-time continuum. This desperate final act, consuming both the Loyalist vessel and its traitor attackers, created a navigational hazard that disrupted the blockade pattern long enough for 5 additional evacuation ships to slip through the gap. The Omnissiah's blessing reached its rendezvous coordinates and began recovery operations for the engine seers and technical personnel from the surviving transports. The ship's cavernous cargo bays, converted into temporary habitation spaces, filled with tech priests of varying ranks and specializations, each bringing crucial knowledge or skills that would be needed to rebuild elsewhere. Medical servitors attended to those whose biological components had suffered during the hasty evacuation, while tech priests specialized in augmetic maintenance repaired damaged cybernetic systems. Among these evacuees were several figures whose expertise would prove crucial to the Imperium's technological survival during the heresy. Magos Biologis Valentin Mu, one of Mars's foremost experts in the maintenance of Astartes gene-seed storage systems, brought complete template data for the cultivation chambers used by all 20 Space Marine legions. Without these templates, the Legion's ability to replace battle losses would have degraded significantly over time, potentially leading to their extinction regardless of battlefield outcomes. Similarly vital was the extraction of Archmagos Plosk, senior custodian of the Titan Machine Spirit Communion protocols. His neural architecture contained encryption keys that allowed communication with the most ancient and powerful god machines, including Titans whose machine spirits had grown so complex over millennia of operation that they verged on true consciousness. Plosk's knowledge represented one of the few safeguards preventing these massive war engines from developing the independence that might lead to another catastrophic rebellion of the machines. The diaspora of Mechanicum knowledge extended far beyond Kane's direct evacuation efforts. Across the Imperium, Forge worlds that had maintained their loyalty to the Emperor began receiving refugees from Mars, tech priests who had been off-world when the Schism erupted and found themselves unable to return. These individuals, often specialists sent to oversee particular manufacturing projects or research initiatives on distant planets, suddenly became the sole repositories of technical traditions developed over centuries on Mars. This dispersal pattern created both vulnerabilities and unexpected resilience in the Loyalist Mechanicum's knowledge base. Certain technical specialties became concentrated on specific forge worlds based on which refugees reached them. Metallica received a disproportionate number of weapons specialists, transforming its production focus toward military hardware that would supply Loyalist forces throughout the heresy. Ryza gained experts in plasma technology who accelerated its research into energy weapons. Lucius, with its existing specialization in Titan production, welcomed engine seers who brought new insights into machine spirit communion protocols. While Kane's flagship and its accompanying vessels fought their way clear of the Martian blockade, secondary evacuation efforts continued across the planet's surface. Not all Loyalists could reach designated extraction points, particularly those in forge complexes that had been completely surrounded by traitor forces. These isolated tech priests implemented alternative survival strategies, going into hiding within the vast industrial landscapes they knew intimately. The most successful of these holdout operations occurred in the Tharsis region, where a group led by Magos Dominus Yivar Khan established a hidden enclave in the maintenance levels beneath an abandoned manufacturing complex. Khan's forces, comprising approximately 300 tech priests and 2,000 Skitarii, converted the facility's geothermal tap into a sustainable power source and repurposed manufacturing equipment to produce essential supplies. They established a closed ecosystem that could theoretically sustain them indefinitely, creating a Loyalist island in the sea of corruption that Mars had become. Other tech priests chose more radical approaches to preservation. Magos Biologi's Aridin Tesla, unable to reach evacuation transports with her critical xenobiological research, uploaded her consciousness into a specialized data core and instructed her most trusted disciples to conceal this core within a servitor designated for routine maintenance work. This servitor, its true nature hidden beneath layers of mundane programming, was assigned to a supply vessel bound for Terra. Tesla's consciousness remained dormant during transit, preserving her knowledge until the servitor could be recovered by Loyalist forces upon reaching the Imperial Palace. As the last Loyalist ships broke through the orbital blockade above Mars, they carried with them more than just personnel and data. They bore the fragmented legacy of humanity's technological heritage, knowledge that would determine the Imperium's capacity to wage war and sustain civilization in the coming millennia. The Schism of Mars represented not just a military defeat for the Loyalists, but a catastrophic regression in human technological capability that would echo through the ages. Fabricator Locum Kane stood on the command deck of the Omnissiah's Blessing, his augmetic eyes scanning the tactical displays as Mars receded behind them. The red planet, once humanity's crowning technological achievement, now glowed with unnatural fires visible even from orbit. Forge complexes that had stood for thousands of years lay in ruins, their knowledge repositories corrupted or destroyed. The Mechanicum that had unified Mars under the banner of the quest for knowledge had ceased to exist, replaced by two irreconcilable factions with fundamentally opposed understandings of technology's purpose. The transformation of the Loyalist Mechanicum into what would become the Adeptus Mechanicus began during this exodus. Kane, as the highest-ranking tech priest to escape Mars with his loyalty intact, implemented emergency reorganization protocols aboard the refugee fleet. The traditional structure of the Mechanicum, with its emphasis on theoretical research and archaeological recovery, gave way to a more pragmatic focus on preserving and applying existing knowledge. Tech priests who had once dedicated their lives to pushing the boundaries of human technological understanding now found themselves tasked with standardizing production methods that could be implemented across scattered forge worlds. This shift manifested most visibly in the Fabricator Locum's first general directive, transmitted to all Loyalist vessels and forge worlds: knowledge preserved surpasses knowledge pursued. This simple statement represented a fundamental reorientation of the Mechanicum's core philosophy. where the pre-heresy organization had balanced preservation with controlled innovation, the emerging Adeptus Mechanicus would prioritize safeguarding existing technology over developing new applications. This conservative approach, born of necessity in crisis, would calcify over subsequent millennia into dogmatic resistance to technological change. The immediate technological impact of the schism became apparent as the refugee tech priests established themselves on loyalist forge worlds. Crucial manufacturing processes that had existed only on Mars were lost or fragmented, creating immediate production bottlenecks for essential war materiel. The construction of Terminator armor, already limited by material constraints, suffered particular disruption when the forge complex containing the complete template for its advanced servo motors was destroyed in the fighting. Tech priests on Metallica attempted to reconstruct the designs from partial templates and existing examples, but the resulting patterns lacked the efficiency and durability of the original Mars pattern components. Similar degradation occurred across virtually all complex technologies. The Leman Russ battle tank, backbone of Imperial Army armored divisions, saw its production efficiency decrease by nearly 30% as manufacturers struggled to replicate Mars standard quality control without access to the specialized testing equipment that had existed only in the Olympus Mons facilities. The tank remained functional but required more maintenance and suffered more frequent mechanical failures, placing additional strain on field repair units. Perhaps most critically, the production of new Titans, the god machines that represented the pinnacle of Imperial military technology, became significantly more challenging. The forging of a Titan's plasma reactor had been performed exclusively in the specialized foundries of the Mondus Oculum complex, using techniques refined over thousands of years. With these facilities captured or destroyed, the remaining forge worlds could produce only approximations of the original designs. These reactors functioned but operated at lower efficiency and with reduced service life, constraining the Collegia Titanicas' ability to replace losses. The technological regression extended beyond military applications to fundamental infrastructure technologies. The Mars pattern void shield generators, which had protected Imperial void ships and critical installations, relied on rare earth elements processed through methods known only to specialized tech priests in the Clarion Forge complex. With these experts either dead or fled to scattered locations, void shield production became less reliable, with newer generators exhibiting power fluctuations and reduced resilience under sustained bombardment. This degradation in manufacturing capability coincided with the loss of irreplaceable archaeotech artifacts stored in Martian vaults. The Hall of Ancient Patterns in Olympus Mons had contained working examples of technologies from humanity's Dark Age, preserved as templates for potential future replication. Among these were graviton impeller systems more efficient than anything the Mechanicum could produce, compact energy sources that could power a hive city for decades without refueling, and medical technologies capable of regenerating damaged tissue without risk of rejection. These artifacts, accumulated over thousands of years of careful archaeological recovery, were destroyed or captured during the fighting, eliminating even the possibility of future reverse engineering. While Loyalist forces suffered these devastating losses, the Dark Mechanicum retreated to various strongholds with their own technological prizes. The most significant concentration of traitor tech priests accompanied Horus's forces to the Eye of Terror, establishing forge bases on demon worlds where the laws of physics yielded to the corrupting influence of the warp. These environments, hostile to conventional technology, proved surprisingly conducive to the development of the hybrid techno-organic constructs that would become the Dark Mechanicum's hallmark. Free from imperial restrictions and Mechanicum doctrine, the traitor tech priests embraced radical experimentation. They incorporated living tissue into mechanical systems, creating machines that grew and adapted like biological organisms. They developed interfaces between warp energies and material technology, producing weapons that affected not just their target's physical form, but their soul essence. Most heretically, they explored the creation of machine intelligences that incorporated captured human consciousness, blurring the line between artificial cognition and enslaved human souls. These technological heresies manifested most visibly in the corrupted titans that accompanied traitor forces during the later stages of the heresy. The god machines of the Legio Mortis, already showing signs of corruption during the Martian Civil War, underwent grotesque transformations as they operated within warp-saturated environments. Their adamantium hulls developed organic characteristics, with armor plates shifting like muscle tissue and weapons bleeding actual blood when damaged. Their machine spirits, once loyal servants of their princeps, evolved into predatory entities that sometimes seized control from their human operators to satisfy their own bloodlust. Similar corruption affected smaller war machines. The battle automata of the Legio Cybernetica, designed with limited autonomous capability to prevent true artificial intelligence from emerging, developed disturbing levels of independent action under the influence of scrap code infection. Reports from loyalist forces facing these corrupted constructs described machines that appeared to take pleasure in killing, that modified their own bodies to incorporate trophies from slain enemies, and that communicated with each other through screeching vox emissions that caused psychological distress in human listeners. The technological divergence between loyalist and traitor forces accelerated throughout the heresy. While the Adeptus Mechanicus struggled to maintain production standards with fragmented knowledge and damaged industrial capacity, the Dark Mechanicum pursued increasingly radical innovations unbounded by traditional constraints. This created an asymmetric technological environment where loyalist forces relied on increasingly standardized and conservative designs, while facing enemies whose technological capabilities evolved in unpredictable and disturbing directions. This divergence would persist long after the heresy's conclusion. The Adeptus Mechanicus, traumatized by the betrayal of its leadership and the loss of its sacred homeworld, retreated further into technological conservatism. Innovation became increasingly suspect, associated with the heresies of the Dark Mechanicum. The quest for knowledge, once focused on advancing human technological capability, narrowed to the recovery and preservation of existing technology. Tech priests who proposed modifications to established designs faced intense scrutiny, often requiring decades of testing and theological review before their innovations could be implemented. The Dark Mechanicum, meanwhile, continued its heretical experimentation in the relative safety of the Eye of Terror and other warp-tainted regions. Their technological development followed no coherent doctrine, but rather the whims of individual tech priests and the influence of the chaos gods they served. Some focused on creating ever more destructive weapons, while others pursued the perfect fusion of flesh and machine, creating abominable hybrid creatures that defied categorization as either living beings or mechanical constructs. The long-term consequences of this division shaped imperial technological development throughout the subsequent millennia. The Adeptus Mechanicus, having lost much of its theoretical foundation during the Schism, increasingly relied on rote replication of existing designs without fully understanding the principles behind them. This approach maintained basic functionality, but eliminated the capacity for meaningful improvement or adaptation to new challenges. Technologies that could not be reproduced with available knowledge and materials gradually disappeared from the imperial arsenal, creating a slow but inexorable technological regression. This regression manifested most clearly in the field of electronics and computational systems. Pre-heresy Mars had possessed the capability to produce logic engines of remarkable sophistication, approaching the threshold of true artificial intelligence. The manufacture of these advanced cogitators required specialized facilities in the Olympus Mons complex, all destroyed during the Schism. Without these facilities, the Adeptus Mechanicus fell back on producing simpler computational systems that sacrificed efficiency for reliability and theological safety. The loss of advanced computational capability created cascading effects across all technological domains. Void ship navigation systems became less precise, requiring larger crews to perform calculations that more advanced cogitators could have handled automatically. Targeting systems for weapon platforms decreased in accuracy, necessitating greater ammunition expenditure to achieve the same results. Industrial production required more human oversight, reducing efficiency and increasing the possibility of error. Perhaps most significantly, the capacity for technological innovation itself degraded as the institutional knowledge of research methodology was lost. Pre-heresy Mars had maintained a careful balance between doctrinal stability and controlled advancement, with specialized divisions dedicated to testing potential improvements within theological boundaries. The destruction of these research institutions during the Schism eliminated not just their current projects, but the very framework for conducting sanctioned technological development. Future generations of tech priests would have to rediscover these methodologies through trial and error, often facing accusations of heresy for work that would have been considered routine before the heresy. The psychological impact of the Schism proved as damaging as the material losses. Tech priests who survived the conflict carried deep trauma that influenced their approach to technology and knowledge. Many developed obsessive behaviors around data preservation, creating redundant storage systems and ritualized copying procedures that prioritize the exact replication of existing information over understanding its content. Others became paranoid about potential corruption, implementing increasingly elaborate purification protocols for any technology that had contacted non-Mechanicus personnel. This trauma transmitted itself to subsequent generations through both formal instruction and the apprenticeship system that formed the backbone of Mechanicus knowledge transfer. Young tech priests learned to fear innovation and question even minor deviations from established patterns. The theological framework of the cult Mechanicus, which had originally accommodated a degree of controlled progress, calcified around the preservation of technology exactly as it existed at the end of the heresy, a moment artificially frozen in time and elevated to doctrinal perfection. By the 32nd millennium, the consequences of the Schism had fully manifested in imperial technological capability. The construction of new technologies had largely ceased, replaced by the increasingly ritualized reproduction of existing designs. When faced with new challenges, the Adeptus Mechanicus responded not by developing specialized solutions, but by adapting existing technologies, often with suboptimal results. The quest for knowledge had narrowed to the recovery of pre-heresy technologies, with the discovery of an intact STC template considered more valuable than any amount of new research. The Dark Mechanicum, by contrast, continued its heretical experimentation, producing technologies that defied conventional understanding. Demon engines, machines possessed by warp entities, became their signature creation, combining material technology with demonic essence to create weapons of terrifying power. These abominations exhibited capabilities impossible under normal physical laws, from regenerating damaged components to existing simultaneously in real space and the warp. The technological gulf between the Imperium and the Dark Mechanicum thus took on a qualitative rather than merely quantitative dimension. Imperial technology, while degraded from its pre-heresy peak, maintained a consistent functionality based on understood physical principles. Dark Mechanicum creations operated according to no consistent rules, their capabilities determined as much by the whims of the warp entities bound within them as by their material components. This fundamental division in technological philosophy would define the relationship between the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Dark Mechanicum for millennia to come. What had begun as a political schism evolved into two irreconcilable approaches to technology itself, one viewing it as a sacred trust to be preserved unchanged, the other as a medium for unlimited and unholy experimentation. Between these extremes, the balanced approach of the pre-heresy Mechanicum, technological advancement guided by caution and principle, was lost, another casualty of the galaxy-spanning conflict that nearly destroyed humanity. The red dust of Mars, which had witnessed humanity's greatest technological achievements, now settled over the ruins of that legacy. The Schism of Mars represented not just a battle for control of a planet, but a pivotal moment in human technological history, the point at which mankind's relationship with its own technology fundamentally changed. The age of the Imperium would be defined not by technological progress, but by the desperate preservation of fragments from a greater past, a shadow of what might have been had the Mechanicum remained whole.